Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? It wasn't on any map, not the old hand-drawn ones, not the digital grid overlays, not even the recent drone scans of the area. But when Isaac drove down Birch Hollow Road that Wednesday morning, the house was there, looming, silent, wrong. Isaac wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. He'd taken a different route to the demolition site, hoping to dodge a wreck he'd heard about on the radio. But what was meant to be a harmless detour through the sleepy outskirts of Hallow Glen quickly morphed into something else entirely. The house stood alone, buried in a thicket of dark pine trees, where no house had stood before. Its windows were bricked shut from the inside. Vines gripped the walls like skeletal fingers, their origin unclear. The paint on the exterior peeled not from age, but like it had been scorched, curled away from some long-forgotten fire. Yet the roof was pristine, untouched. That's what did it for Isaac, the contradiction. It was the kind of detail that tugs at the back of your mind long after your eyes have moved on. He slowed the truck to a crawl, then stopped. There was no driveway, no mailbox, no number. The land around it was oddly untouched. No tire tracks, no footpaths. Just waste, high grass, and twisted shrubs that almost seemed to shiver in the breeze, despite the stillness of the air. Isaac shut the engine off. A wrongness soaked the scene, like something you could taste. He told himself it was curiosity that made him get out of the truck, but that wasn't quite true. It was something heavier, something pulling. He stepped over the rotted fence post, which snapped like a bone beneath his boot, and made his way toward the house. The air grew colder with each step, though the sky was a bright and cloudless June blue. Birds had vanished. Even the buzzing of insects gave way to silence that pressed against his eardrums like pressure underwater. The door stood open, not inviting, not even ajar, but gaping, like the house had been waiting for someone to notice it. He paused at the threshold. The interior was wrong. It looked bigger than the outside. The foyer stretched far too deep, disappearing into shadows despite the daylight. There were no light fixtures. The walls were made of an unfamiliar dark wood that seemed to soak in the light. And the smell, damp earth, rusted iron, and something sharp, like ozone. Isaac turned to leave. Except the front yard was gone. He blinked. Where the door should have looked out to the field and the road beyond, there was only more hallway. No grass. No truck. No way back. He hadn't moved. He was certain of that. His boots were planted where they'd been. But outside had become inside. That was when the floor creaked upstairs. It wasn't the casual groan of old wood, but a heavy, deliberate step followed by another. Then silence. He whispered to himself, "This isn't real." But it was. The air shifted. A breeze from nowhere blew past him, carrying the faint sound of whispering. It wasn't in English. Wasn't in any language Isaac knew. But the cadence felt familiar, mocking, scornful. He turned, heart thudding. The house had changed again. Where there'd been one hallway, there were now two. One stretched to the left, the other to the right. Each was lined with closed doors, identical in shape, mismatched in color. Some were cracked. Some were bleeding light from underneath. One pulsed like something breathing behind it. A child's laugh echoed down the left hall. Then another footstep, closer this time. Isaac didn't choose a direction. His legs did. They dragged him down the right hall, faster than he could think, heart beating hard enough to hurt. He passed doors, each one more warped than the last. One had deep gouges running down its center, like fingernails clawing to get out. Another was covered in tiny handprints. He stopped at a room that looked different, less threatening somehow. The door was painted white and clean. Too clean. He pushed it open. Inside was a replica of his childhood bedroom. The wallpaper, the bunk beds, the stained carpet. The cracked ceiling fan that always wobbled but never fell. It was all there, untouched by time. Even the red model airplane he'd broken when he was 9 sat on the dresser, the broken wing still taped back on with the same strip of Batman-themed adhesive. He walked inside, and the door slammed shut behind him. Isaac spun, trying the handle. Locked, of course. He pounded on it, but the wood soaked up the noise. It didn't echo. Nothing did. He turned back to the room, suddenly aware of a presence. Someone, or something, was under the bed. He could hear it breathing. No childlike panting, no soft snores. This was guttural. Wet. Wrong. Isaac backed away, reaching for the dresser. His hand brushed something cold. A photograph. It was a picture of him, taken at a family picnic when he was about 10. He didn't remember this exact photo, but that wasn't what caught his attention. Everyone in the picture was smiling, except for him. He was staring into the camera with an expression of pure terror. His eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, and behind him, deep in the background near the tree line, was the house. The same house. Isaac dropped the photo. The breathing stopped. A hand, long and pale with too many joints, reached out from under the bed, fingertips grazing the carpet like it was tasting it. Then it curled into a fist and slowly began to pull itself out. Isaac didn't wait. He charged the door, slamming his shoulder into it once. Twice, it cracked open on the third try. He stumbled out into a hospital corridor. Everything had shifted again. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Linoleum floors stretched out in both directions. Doors lined the walls, each marked with faded numbers and blinking call lights. Somewhere, a heart monitor beeped steadily, too slowly, too loud. He looked behind him. The bedroom was gone. He was alone, except he wasn't. Down the hall, at the far end, stood a figure, tall, featureless, dressed in what looked like hospital scrubs soaked in something dark. It didn't move, didn't speak, but the lights behind it began to flicker, and with each stutter of darkness, it was closer. 30 feet. 20. 15. Isaac ran. Doors whipped past in a blur. Some were open, showing scenes he didn't dare try to make sense of. An operating room full of people with missing faces. A nursery where the babies were all mannequins. A waiting room where every person stared at the ceiling with mouths hanging wide and tongues missing. He didn't stop. Didn't stop until he hit another door and fell through it into the woods. Bright daylight. He was outside. He turned, gasping. No house, just pine trees and silence. Isaac dropped to his knees, hands in the dirt, heart racing so hard he thought it might kill him before whatever was behind that door could. But nothing followed. No breathing, no footsteps, no laughter. His truck was parked just ahead, exactly where he'd left it. The road was there too. The birds, the wind, everything normal. Except when he looked down at his hands, he was still holding the photo. The one from the bedroom. And on the back, in smeared ink that hadn't been there before, were 3 words, "It remembers you." He burned the photo that night, but the dreams came anyway. And the next morning, another house appeared, this time on Chapel Ridge. Not the same one. Not quite. But it had no driveway, no number, no mailbox. And it was waiting. Again. Isaac hadn't slept. He'd tried, locked his doors, bolted his windows, left every light in the house burning until sunrise. But no matter how tightly he curled beneath the sheets, no matter how many times he told himself it was a nightmare or some stress-fueled hallucination, the quiet wouldn't let him forget. The memory of that house, of that wrong place, throbbed behind his eyes like a splinter embedded too deep to pull. And now there was another. He saw it on the way to work, tucked between 2 half-built duplexes on Chapel Ridge, in a spot he'd passed 100 times. It hadn't been there yesterday. Of that he was absolutely sure. It looked different, yes, but only just. Its shape shifted in that same nauseating way, like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be. The wood siding was warped, slanting downward like the house was being pulled into the earth. One window was a perfect oval with glass black as oil. Another was bricked over entirely, but bulged from within, like something behind it was pressing to get out. Isaac didn't stop this time. He hit the gas and didn't slow until he was miles down the road, only letting himself breathe when the structure was out of sight in his rearview mirror. But the feeling didn't leave him. It clung to his skin like humidity, an itch beneath the flesh. At work, nothing felt right. People talked too loudly. Phones rang with no one on the other end. A cold draft crept through the site trailer despite the dead heat outside. Around noon, he went outside for air. That's when his foreman, Mark, approached him with a cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth and eyes squinting against the sun. He slapped Isaac on the shoulder with the same familiar weight he always did. But this time, Isaac flinched. "You good?" Mark asked, brow furrowing. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Isaac lied, watching the smoke drift off the tip of Mark's cigarette and curl into shapes that shouldn't have been possible. He saw the house again, just for a second, in the curling gray, a frame, a hallway. That hand reaching from beneath the bed. He didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove, for hours, past the edge of the county, past familiar signs. He needed distance. Needed to outrun whatever had followed him out of that place. But around midnight, his phone lit up with a single notification. No name. Just a message, still watching. He pulled over on the shoulder, heart hammering, and threw the phone into the trees. But the headlights flickered once, then again, and then the car died entirely, as though the battery had simply given up. Silence. The road was empty, until it wasn't. Something moved in the rearview mirror. Not a person, not an animal, a shape, low to the ground, hunched, long arms dragging behind it. Its gait unnatural and jerky like someone unfamiliar with their own limbs. It darted between trees, always just far enough to blur into the branches, yet too tall to be mistaken for anything wild. Isaac slammed the lock button and gripped the steering wheel. The radio, despite the car being off, hissed to life. White noise. Then a voice, low and warbled, whispered a single word he didn't understand. It sounded like breathing turned into language. He didn't wait to hear it again. He shoved open the door and ran. The woods swallowed him fast. Brambles clawed at his clothes, slicing into skin. Roots caught his boots, threatened to trip him, slow him, drag him down. But he didn't stop. Not until the trees opened into a small clearing, and there, impossibly, was another house. This one was small, old, barely more than a cabin. The door hung loose on rusted hinges. The roof sagged. It looked like it had been forgotten by time. But it was real, tangible, and something about its presence felt less angry. He pushed through the door. The inside was dark, but not the choking dark of the first house. It smelled of wood rot and dust, not blood and ozone. There were signs of life, old cans, broken tools, a cracked lantern. He found a half-melted candle and lit it, the flickering flame throwing shadows on the walls that seemed to lean closer to the light, as if starved for it. That's when he saw the writing. On the walls, etched in dozens of different hands, were messages. Don't trust the mirrors. It copies what you fear. Every house is a piece of it. If you hear your mother's voice, run. Don't open the basement. Don't go back. Isaac backed away from the wall, breathing shallow, the words crawling across his mind like insects. Who wrote them? How many others had seen it? Escaped it, survived. A floorboard creaked behind him. He turned slowly, candle shaking in his hand. Nothing, but the candle flickered, and he felt warmth at his neck. A breath. He spun, but no one was there. Still, the floor was no longer wood, it was tile. And the walls, drywall now. White and sterile, lit with buzzing fluorescence. He was in a hospital again. No, not a hospital. That hospital. The one from the first house. The same corridor. Same pulse of horror behind the humming bulbs. He ran again, every door he passed slamming open as he neared. Inside, glimpses of moments that never happened but still belonged to him. His father, sitting in a chair, eyes black and leaking something that smelled like rot. His sister, mouth stitched shut with rusted wire, pointing at him with shaking hands. Himself, older, broken, sitting in a padded cell whispering, "It's not a house. It's wearing the house." He reached the end of the corridor, where a single metal door waited. He pushed through it and fell, not into another room, not into another hallway, but into darkness, endless. He floated, or fell, he couldn't tell, and around him, voices whispered, names, dates, sins, secrets no one else should know. They told him the date he would die. They told him the sound his mother made when she took her last breath, even though he hadn't been there. They told him things about himself he hadn't remembered until that moment. Then a light, a soft red glow, like embers in a fireplace, and he was in a living room, his living room, except the photos were wrong. Faces were twisted, smudged, eyes scratched out. The TV displayed static. The clock on the wall ran backward. And on the couch sat a child, his daughter. Except Isaac didn't have a daughter. "Daddy," she said, voice trembling. "You left me there." He shook his head, tears filling his eyes. I don't know who you are." "Yes, you do." She reached into her lap and held up a doll. It was his sister's. From when they were kids, the one she'd lost in a fire when their old house burned down. "You left all of us," she whispered. The walls groaned. The floor cracked, and from beneath the couch, that hand emerged again. The same one, dragging itself out of the floor like the world was folding in on itself. He screamed, grabbed the child, doll and all, and ran. The world shifted with every step. Doorways to places he'd never seen. Voices he didn't know. He ran through a desert, a frozen forest, a room filled with clocks all chiming in perfect, maddening rhythm. Through it all, the presence followed. Then he saw it, the real world, a door, at the edge of a broken wall, showing the night street beyond. His truck, the stars. Air he dove through. This time, when he hit the ground, it was gravel, cold, real, solid. Behind him, the door slammed shut and vanished. He lay there, gasping, staring at the stars. The sky blinked. Not the stars. The sky itself blinked. One great, slow shudder, like something vast and hidden, had just taken notice. And from the woods behind him, a voice whispered, "Now it knows your name." He sat up, trembling, because he remembered. As a child, he had seen the house once, for just a moment. In the distance during that family picnic, he'd looked too long. He'd heard his name called softly from between the trees. He had forgotten, but the house had not, and now it was getting closer. For the next 3 nights, Isaac didn't sleep, not truly. Every time his eyes closed, the darkness twisted into tunnels of flickering hallways, places that pulsed and breathed like living things. He'd wake with the taste of ash in his mouth and splinters in his palms, even though he hadn't left the bed. The scratches on his arms got deeper. Bruises appeared in the shapes of fingers, and sometimes he heard footsteps on his roof that stopped the moment he dared look. He tried calling friends, but the calls never connected. The one time his sister answered, all she said was, "You were supposed to forget," before the line went dead. Each day, he drove, hoping to outrun it, hoping he could outdistance something that wasn't tied to the earth. But it didn't matter. Wherever he went, it followed, manifesting in whispers through vents, doors that appeared where they hadn't been, the sudden flicker of old lights in empty buildings. He began seeing it again, the house, sprouting like a weed in places it should not be. A decrepit shack on a pier, a rotting Victorian on a country back road, a condemned motel in the desert, every room locked but one, and from that room, he swore he heard his own voice crying for help. It wasn't just the house anymore. Something inside it had started bleeding into his world. It came to a head on the 4th night. Isaac sat in his kitchen, all the lights on, gun on the table, phone fully charged, trying to convince himself that there was still a line between real and not. The kitchen clock read 3:17 m. The room was still, quiet, The hum of the refrigerator his only company, until a sound rose beneath it, not from outside, not from upstairs, from the floor. It started as a murmur, then a slow scraping, like bone dragged across concrete. He stood, heart racing, as the tiles beneath the kitchen table began to bulge. Something was pushing upward. The floor shifted like breathing flesh. Isaac backed away slowly, grabbing the gun, and then it stopped. Silence. He didn't dare move. The tile settled. A soft knock echoed from the inside of the floor. Then again, louder. This time, paired with a voice that didn't sound quite human. "Let me out." The tiles cracked, one by one. Isaac aimed the gun, but before he could fire, the cracks erupted, and something pulled itself through the floor. It was shaped like a man. But it wasn't a man. It had no skin, muscles exposed, pulsing, twitching. Blood ran in slow rivulets down its arms, dripping onto the floor in a steady rhythm. Its mouth had no lips, just stretched muscle over snapping teeth. Eyes like polished bone. No whites, no pupils. Just sockets that saw far too much. Isaac fired twice. The thing didn't flinch. Instead, it took a step forward, leaving a trail of thick, black blood behind. Then another step, and another. And as it moved, the room began to change. Walls stretched, warped. The ceiling flaked into rot. The kitchen table aged 50 years in seconds, collapsing under its own weight. The gun in Isaac's hand melted into rust. The creature tilted its head. "You saw it," it said in a voice layered with echoes. "Now it can see you." Isaac turned to run, but the hallway had stretched into infinity, every door along it creaking open to reveal scenes too awful to fully comprehend. Images of people being peeled like fruit, children laughing while their parents screamed, a mirror that reflected not his face, but a hole full of teeth. He ran anyway. He didn't know how long the hallway lasted. Time became a joke in that place. But eventually, it shifted. A door at the end of the corridor opened of its own accord, and he burst through it into what looked like a church. Stained glass windows, cracked and smeared with something far too red, pews overturned. The altar was made of bones. A man knelt before it, muttering in tongues, carving letters into his chest with a shard of mirror. Isaac tried to back away, but the door behind him vanished. The man stopped carving, stood, turned. It was the skinless creature, but now wearing Isaac's face. "Do you see what you really are?" it asked in his voice. "Do you remember what you left behind?" Isaac screamed and covered his ears, but he could still hear it, inside his skull. Then the windows shattered and dozens of black birds poured through, pecking at the air, screeching sounds that weren't quite avian. They circled him, tearing at his shirt, drawing blood, whispering in fractured human voices. "You left us. You buried it. We remember." And then he woke. But not in his bed. He was lying in the middle of the road, naked, bleeding, hands raw, his house nowhere in sight. It was dawn. Traffic began to pass. Cars honking, drivers yelling, some slowing down to stare but not stopping to help. He stood on trembling legs, covering himself, trying to piece together what was real and what had just happened. He found his way to a gas station miles from his neighborhood. The clerk stared at him in wide-eyed horror, handed him a blanket, and called the police. While waiting, Isaac washed his hands in the grimy bathroom sink and caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. His eyes. They weren't his. They were too dark, too wide, and when he blinked, something behind his reflection didn't. Later, wrapped in a hospital gown and questioned by deputies who clearly didn't believe him, he kept thinking about the man with no skin. Not just what he was, but what he had said. "You saw it. Now it can see you." Which meant one terrible thing: the house was coming closer. And it wasn't just following him anymore. It was beginning to enter him. Later that night, when he finally managed to get back to what remained of his home, he found a single object on his front porch. There had been no package before, no delivery, but it was there now, a box wrapped in brown paper, tied with sinew. Inside was a single item, a mirror. and written on the glass, smeared in something that smelled like rust and roses, were the words, "Come back. We haven't finished remembering." Isaac didn't bring the mirror inside. He didn't touch it, didn't even look directly at it again after reading those words. Instead, he wrapped it in a tarp, duct taped every edge, and buried it behind the shed under 3 feet of dirt and rock. But when he came back inside, there was another mirror sitting in the hallway, oval-shaped, antique. Its frame was etched with symbols that made his skin crawl the longer he looked at them. He hadn't bought it, hadn't seen it before, and yet it felt like it had always been there, waiting for him to finally notice. He covered that one too, then smashed it. It screamed when it cracked, screamed, not shattered, and then bled. Thick, syrupy black fluid dripped down the shards as they pulsed on the floor like dying things. He swept the pieces into a garbage bag and hurled it into the ravine off Ridgeway Road. But part of him knew it wouldn't matter. Some things, once noticed, couldn't be undone. The house had seen him. That thing wearing his face had spoken with his voice. And now reality was bending, not snapping, but warping, slowly and maliciously, like something enjoying the break. The next morning, he woke up in a different room. It wasn't his bedroom. It should have been, but the bed was wrong. The sheets were yellowed and too short, and the ceiling fan spun counterclockwise. He sat up slowly, heart sinking, then rose and opened the door. The hallway was identical to his, but longer, much longer, a dozen doors on each side, same wallpaper, same lights. But at the end of the hallway was a staircase leading down that hadn't been there before. He whispered to himself, "No. No, no, no." But something about the hallway wanted him to go forward. There was pressure building behind him, behind the walls, like the whole house was holding its breath. So he moved, one step at a time. As he passed the first door, it opened a crack. He froze. From inside, he heard his mother's voice. But she'd been dead 6 years. "Issy," she whispered, using the name she hadn't called him since he was 10. "Sweetheart, it's time to come home. I baked your favorite blueberry muffins." Just like before the fire, he didn't reply, just kept walking. The next door opened as he passed. His father's voice this time. "You were supposed to save us, son, but you left us there." He picked up the pace. Third door, a child's cry, unfamiliar yet oddly personal. Fourth, louder, dozens of voices all laughing in unison, as if mocking him, as if watching through the keyholes with 1,000 unseen eyes. He started running. The hallway never ended. He turned back. The bedroom door was gone. Behind him was only more hallway, more doors, all now slightly open, all spilling fragments of something he didn't want to understand. Screams. Pleas. Scratching. One door thudded again and again, like something huge was trying to break through. Isaac fell to his knees, covered his ears, and shouted, "What do you want from me?" Silence. All the doors stopped moving. Then, all at once, they opened, and he was staring into himself. Each room was a reflection of him at a different age, in different states, happy, sad, broken, cruel. One version was 10 years old, blood on his hands. Another sat in a chair with black veins crawling up his face. Another wept while cradling something in his arms he couldn't see, and one stood completely still, wearing a version of his clothes, only soaked, as if he drowned. That one raised a finger to his lips and said, "Shh," then turned and walked down the stairs at the end of the hallway. Isaac followed. He didn't know why. Just that if he stayed where he was, the walls would start closing in. Literally. He could feel them inching closer, every second tighter, every breath harder to take. The staircase creaked. Dust rained from above. It spiraled endlessly downward, like the spine of some great beast twisting through the dark. He lost track of how long he walked. Time thickened. His legs ached. Then suddenly he was in a new room. It resembled a hospital waiting room, but the details were off. Too many chairs, no exit. A TV on the wall showed static. Magazines were written in nonsense symbols. One woman sat across from him, her head bent at an impossible angle, mouth open, jaw hanging loose as if unhinged. He tried to speak. She whispered first. "They're not rooms," she said without lifting her head. "They're lungs. You're inside it. And it's breathing." "What is it?" He whispered back. She raised her face. Her eyes were missing, sockets smooth and stitched closed. "It remembers you," she said, "and it forgives nothing." Then she screamed. It wasn't loud but wrong, a sound that didn't match her mouth. It stretched too far, lasted too long. Isaac clapped his hands to his ears, stumbled backward, and tripped through a door that hadn't been there a second ago. He landed in his childhood bedroom. Again, same red airplane, same cracked ceiling fan, except this time everything was covered in dust. A tape recorder sat on the bed. He walked over to it, hit play. His own voice crackled from the speakers. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to leave you behind. I didn't know. I was a kid." Then another voice replied, soft, feminine, broken. "You promised, Issy. You promised we'd leave together." The door creaked. His sister stood there. Only, she had no eyes. Her face had been peeled in long strips, revealing raw pink beneath. But she still smiled, like she was glad to see him. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" she asked sweetly. He shook his head, terrified. "You said, 'Wait here. I'll come back for you.' But you never did." "It wasn't real," he whispered. "The fire, it was an accident. It was real. The house made it happen. Because you looked at it too long. Because you heard it whisper. You brought it home, Issy. You brought it into us." She stepped closer. "Now you have to go back. You have to finish what you started. I don't know what that is." She smiled wider, blood oozing from the corners of her mouth. "Yes, you do." And then the floor split open beneath him. He fell again, longer this time, as if gravity had changed its mind. And when he landed, he stood in front of the house. The first house, the one on Birch Hollow Road. Except now it looked ancient, larger. The ground around it cracked. The air swam with ash. All the windows were open. The door slowly swung wide, and Isaac finally understood it was never just a house. It was a mouth, and it was waiting to eat what was left of him. The doorway loomed like a wound cut into the world, raw and inviting. Isaac stood before it, feet rooted to the cracked stone path, heart pounding in a stuttering rhythm that didn't feel like his own anymore. The air around the house buzzed faintly, like cicadas in the dead of night, but with a deeper pitch, lower, hungrier. It didn't feel like sound. It felt like something chewing just outside the range of hearing. He should have run. Everything in him screamed to turn around, to escape, to forget again. But it was far too late for that. Forgetting had only made things worse. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. Not with a bang, but with a wet thump, like muscle closing over bone. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It pressed against his skull, made the air feel heavier, like the house didn't want sound unless it came from itself. The foyer stretched endlessly now, longer, darker, as though the walls had given up pretending to obey geometry. The light had no source. The shadows had no anchors. Time was wrong here. As Isaac took a cautious step forward, his watch cracked. The face splintered without being touched. The second hand froze at 3:17 a.m., the same time he'd heard the knock beneath the kitchen floor. He peeled it from his wrist and dropped it, watching it vanish the moment it hit the carpet. Just gone, like time wasn't allowed to exist in this place unless the house decided it could. The floor beneath him was warm. He walked. Each step sank half an inch too far, like the wood beneath the carpet was softening, pulsing faintly beneath his feet. The walls shivered when he passed. The doors watched him. Not figuratively, he saw it now, the way each knob twitched, the way the panels swelled and receded, breathing. The wallpaper flaked like dead skin. He passed a mirror hanging crookedly in the hall, but when he looked into it, he didn't see himself. He saw the man with no skin, still grinning, but this time holding hands with someone else. A child. The girl from before. She mouthed something Isaac couldn't hear. He turned away. A door on his left opened without a sound. The room inside was a classroom, though the desks were crooked and carved with hundreds of overlapping messages. Some were names. Some were dates. Some were screams scratched so deep they pierced the wood. At the front of the room, a teacher stood facing the chalkboard. He wore Isaac's face, but it was older, worn, aged beyond reason, wrinkled in ways a man of 35 shouldn't be. He held chalk in a skeletal hand and wrote a single word again and again on the board, Remy MBR. Isaac backed away. The teacher turned, revealing empty sockets and a stitched shut mouth. He raised a shaking finger and pointed at Isaac. The chalkboard exploded into flame. He slammed the door shut. Beneath his hands, the wood writhed, like it didn't appreciate being denied. The hallway behind him was gone. He was in a bedroom now. His childhood bed sat in the center, clean, perfect, untouched. On it lay the red model airplane, this time whole, unmarred. But the moment he stepped forward, the bed frame groaned like a dying animal. He stopped. And that's when he saw them. Photographs. Dozens. Tacked to the walls, lining the floor, hanging from the ceiling by strands of hair. All of them of him. In each one, he was standing in front of the house. Different angles, different seasons, different years. In some he was a child. In others a teenager. One showed him just 2 years ago, walking past Birch Hollow Road, glancing toward the trees. In every photo, he wore a different expression. Confusion, fear, grief. But in each image, no matter the pose or age, the same thing lingered behind him, the house. Growing. He picked one up. On the back, in smudged black ink, were the words, "You never left." His mouth went dry. A noise rose behind him. Something dragging across carpet. Slow. Deliberate. He turned. The bed was gone. In its place was a long hallway, lit by hanging bulbs swaying, as if someone had just passed by. He stepped forward again, this time feeling the air change. It grew thick, warmer, and then it hit him. The hallway was a loop. He walked for 5 minutes, 10. Every time he passed a particular gouge in the wall, he knew it was the same. He was going in circles, or the house was circling him. He stopped and shouted, "What do you want?" The lights went out. Total darkness. Silence again. Then a whisper right at his ear to finish the memory. The lights blinked back on. Only now, the hallway was filled with people. Every door was open, and figures stood in each one, some familiar, some not. His sister, face untouched now, hair tied in the same ponytail she wore at 7. His father, looking down, disappointment etched deep in his face. A girl he hadn't seen in 20 years, someone he knew in college. Dead now, he remembered. Killed in a crash after he'd drunkenly left her at a bar. They all stared at him. He took a step back. Another. Then the hallway contracted. Literally breathed in. The walls pushed in, forcing him forward. Each step brought him closer to the end, where one last door waited. No handle. Only a keyhole shaped like an eye. And above it, a plaque read, "Here lies the first time." The walls pushed again. He was out of options. He placed his palm against the keyhole, and something behind the door shuddered. Not moved. Shuddered, as if recognizing him. As if waking up. The door swung open. Beyond it was a living room, burned and blackened. The remains of furniture half melted. Smoke stained walls. A child's shoe in the corner, half charred. He stepped inside. It was the night of the fire. His childhood home. The one that had burned down when he was 10. Only now, it was frozen in time, flickering at the edges, like a bad signal on an old television. A scene paused just before something terrible happened. He saw himself, 10 years old, standing at the front door, staring at something outside. Then he looked. Through the warped, soot-blackened window, and there it was, the house. Not his house, the house. The one on Birch Hollow. Already waiting, already watching. Even back then, he had opened the door that night, gone outside. Drawn to it. He remembered none of this until now. He'd come back smelling of smoke. He'd lied when they asked. The fire had started while he'd been gone. His sister had screamed. He hadn't made it to her room in time. And now the memory was stitching itself back together. Behind him, a voice spoke in his own voice. "You opened the door, Isaac." And it never closed. He turned. The skinless man stood there, no longer grinning. Instead, it looked satisfied. It held something in its hand. A beating heart, his. Then everything collapsed. Flames engulfed the room, and the walls turned inside out. He fell again, and when he landed, he wasn't alone. Hundreds of people surrounded him in the dark, all staring, all whispering his name, all forgotten victims of the house. Their mouths moved in unison, "Welcome home." Isaac screamed, but no sound came out. And behind the crowd, the house breathed, waiting for the next door to open. When Isaac awoke, he was standing in front of a mirror. Not just any mirror, the one he'd buried behind the shed. The tarp was gone. The duct tape, the dirt, the rocks all gone. It stood on its own now, completely clean, somehow brighter than the dim hallway around it. There was no dust, no cracks. It shimmered like glass made of water, but it wasn't his reflection staring back. Not exactly. The man in the mirror looked like him. Same eyes, same shape, same scars. But the movements were off by a second, delayed like a memory trying to catch up. And worse. When Isaac raised his hand to his face, the figure didn't. It smiled instead. Isaac took a step back, heart pounding. The reflection didn't move. Instead, it spoke. "Every time you forget, I get stronger." Its voice was Isaac's, but layered. Something deeper underneath, like a choir of broken, throated things whispering in chorus. "You buried the mirror," it said, tilting its head, "but not what it shows." Isaac turned to run, but the hallway had changed again. No windows, no doors. The mirror was the only thing left, and when he turned back, the reflection had stepped out of the glass. It was real now. Same clothes, same face, same voice. But its eyes, they didn't blink. They never blinked. Isaac backed away slowly, trembling. "You're not me," he said. "Oh, but I am," the thing said gently. "I'm the part you left behind. The part that stayed when the fire started. The version that didn't run. I was a kid," Isaac whispered. "And you chose to forget." The lights above began to dim, one by one. Isaac stumbled backward into the dark, searching for anything, an exit, a wall, something to anchor him, but found only more hallway, endlessly repeating. The other Isaac followed at a slow pace, barefoot, expression calm, hands clasped behind his back, like a priest preparing for a sermon. "It's not just memory, Isaac, it's doors. You open them every time you remember something. And the house just walks through." The hallway changed again. Now it was covered in photographs. Polaroids nailed to the walls. Every single one showed a moment from his life, but not as he remembered it. In these images, he was always standing in front of the house. Birch Hollow, Chapel Ridge, the house by the lake, places that shouldn't have been connected. But they were all part of it. It was never just one house, the reflection said. It wears places like you wear clothes. You see a new one every time because that's how it survives. It builds itself from pieces of you, of everyone who looks too long. Isaac reached for one of the photos, tried to tear it down. It screamed when he touched it, not loudly, not angrily. It screamed like a person. And the second his fingers touched it, he saw, not a photo, but a memory, twisted and real. He was 12, alone in the woods. He thought he was following a deer. But it wasn't. It was himself running ahead, laughing, leading him deeper until the trees closed in and a door appeared in the trunk of an old pine. He'd stepped through it, forgotten it, but it had waited. "Do you see now?" his reflection asked. "You never left. You only woke up again." Isaac shook his head, gripping the sides of his skull. "I want out," he said. "I don't care what I forgot. I want out. There is no out. Only in." The reflection stepped forward again, and suddenly, Isaac was no longer in a hallway. He stood in his old therapist's office. Sunlight streamed through the blinds. The clock ticked softly, and across from him, in the worn-out armchair, sat Dr. Ellman, the man he'd seen every week for years after the fire. He looked the same. Corduroy jacket, tired eyes, voice calm. "Tell me what you remember about that night, Isaac," Dr. Ellman said, notepad on his lap. Isaac swallowed hard. "This isn't real." "It doesn't matter if it's real," Dr. Ellman said. "Your mind brought you here. Something inside you wants to open that door." "I didn't start the fire," Isaac said. "No one said you did. I didn't mean to leave her, but you did." Isaac stood up. The office dissolved. Walls melted like wax. The air filled with smoke. Sirens in the distance. The world shimmered, pulled apart, and the house was there again. This time, it stood in the middle of a field. No street, no trees. Just an endless flat plain, and the wind howling like wolves at dusk. It waited with its mouth open, door yawning wide, windows like sockets. "I won't go back," Isaac whispered. "You never left," the reflection repeated, appearing beside him again. "Every time you close your eyes, you return. Every time you dream, you feed it. You think you're running, but all you're doing is pacing in its stomach." Isaac turned slowly toward him. "You're not real." "I'm more real than you," the thing said. "Because I remember everything." Lightning cracked the sky. The house lit up from within, silhouettes moving behind the windows. Too many to count, some dancing, some writhing, some watching, and then he saw her, his sister, in the top right window, staring down at him, mouth moving, no sound. He ran. Across the field. Toward the house, toward the mouth that had always waited. The reflection followed beside him, laughing now, high, gleeful. Feral. The steps of the house were longer now. Each one stretched as he approached, impossible angles that made gravity shift beneath his feet. Still, he climbed. Still, he opened the door. And inside, he didn't find fire. He found a memory. The real one. That night, 10 years old. His sister had begged him not to go. Had held onto his arm, crying. But the whisper had come from the woods again. "Come see me." He had gone. And while he wandered through the trees, drawn by that voice, that lure, the fire had started. Not by accident. Not by faulty wiring. But by design. The house hadn't wanted him. It had wanted her. It had needed her. But it had taken too much. He'd ruined its plan. So now, all these years later, it was trying again. "You owe it," the reflection said beside him. "You broke the memory. You left it unfinished. And it doesn't like loose ends." The house began to shake. Pictures fell from the walls. The ceiling cracked. A voice boomed from somewhere too deep to trace, "Give her back. Or give yourself." Isaac turned toward the stairs. He could still see his sister in the top room, crying, waiting, and the door at the top was open. The choice was clear. Either he climbed or something worse would descend. He ran for the stairs, and the house, hungry, ancient, patient, smiled. The stairs groaned beneath Isaac's weight as he ran, each step sounding like a throat trying to clear itself. The railing pulsed beneath his grip, sticky and warm, as though it had veins just beneath the surface. The higher he climbed, the heavier the air became, thick like syrup, humid like breath. The house moaned with every footfall, not in pain, but in pleasure. It had been waiting for this moment a long, long time. It knew he was coming back. It always knew. The hallway at the top stretched like a spine, crooked and wrong. There were more doors now, dozens, hundreds, stacked end to end like vertebrae. Each door throbbed faintly with a heartbeat of its own. Each one whispered to him, "Don't forget. Don't forget. Don't forget." Their voices were dry, rasping, like lungs that had been breathing dust for centuries. He didn't stop. He couldn't. At the end of the hallway, through the trembling flicker of unnatural light, was the room he'd seen her in. His sister. She was waiting. The door was already open. He stepped inside and the floor gave slightly, like sponge. The wallpaper was scorched, curling at the edges. The bed was small, made up neatly, with the old stuffed rabbit she used to carry clutched between two tiny hands. And there she sat, his sister, Anna, or something wearing her shape. Her back was to him. Her hair was longer than he remembered, darker, and moved as if stirred by a wind that wasn't there. He swallowed and took a trembling step forward. "Anna," he whispered. She didn't turn, but her voice came, soft and distant. "You came back." Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. "I didn't mean to leave. I didn't know. I was just a kid. They told me you didn't. I died screaming." Her voice was flat, cold. "I know," he choked. "I'm sorry. I should have saved you." "You did worse than leave," she said, finally turning. Her face was perfect, just as he remembered before the fire. But her eyes were empty, just black hollows that stretched too deep, too far, like staring down a well that had no bottom. "You forgot me," she said. The floor cracked. Isaac stumbled back. "No, I didn't forget. I couldn't. You buried me, Isaac. You buried me in your mind. You let them tell you it wasn't your fault. You let them medicate you, talk you out of what you saw, what you heard. The house whispered to you, and you listened. But you didn't stay. You left me behind, with it." The walls around her began to breathe, pushing in and out, cracking at the seams. She stood slowly, her hands dropping the rabbit, which hit the floor with a soft, wet thud. "You think this place haunts you," she said, voice rising. "You fed it. Every time you forgot. Every time you denied what happened. You let it grow." The room shifted, warped, became older, darker. The air turned sour, thick with rot and something worse, something ancient. And then she wasn't Anna anymore. Her skin sloughed off in patches. Her face twisted sideways, folding into itself like damp paper. Her limbs elongated. The thing that stood before him now was only partly human. Still her voice, still her sadness, but the body was built of nightmare. Too tall, too sharp, riddled with mouths that blinked like eyes, and eyes that never blinked at all. Isaac stumbled back into the hallway, but the hallway was gone. He was standing in a field again. Twilight, windless, and the house was in front of him. Only now it was massive. Impossible. A monolith of rotting wood and memory, built from every version of itself he'd ever seen. Victorian shingles over shotgun shacks, motel doors beside Gothic balconies. The structure spiraled upward, like it wanted to pierce the sky and drag down whatever gods might be hiding up there. It was alive, and it saw him. Windows opened one by one like blinking eyes. Every shutter snapped back. The house breathed in, and from within came the voices, all of them. Anna, his father, his mother, his therapist, the reflection, the skinless man, all speaking at once. "Choose." He fell to his knees. "What do you want from me?" "Choose," they said again. "Her or you." The sky turned black. The ground beneath him pulsed with warmth. He looked up, and she stood beside the front door now. His sister, young again, 7, in her pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit. Tears fell freely now. He took a step toward her. "I want to save you," he whispered. She tilted her head. "It's too late for that." The house opened wider. The door became a mouth. The steps became teeth. The siding peeled back like muscle. And inside, he saw the truth. It had never just been about forgetting. The house needed memory to live. It fed on guilt, on moments denied, on the psychic rot of unspoken blame. Every room he'd seen, every mirror, every impossible hallway. It was carving his mind into hallways and staircases, making him part of its design. "You can leave," the voices said, "but only one of you can. Her or him. One sacrifice. One memory kept alive." He stepped forward, eyes never leaving hers. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't know, but I do now." He took her hand and stepped into the house. The door shut. The sky returned. The field went quiet. And just like that, Isaac was gone. A week later, a hiker passing Birch Hollow swore they saw a little girl sitting on the front steps of a house that wasn't on any map. When police came, they found nothing. No house, no girl, just a broken red toy airplane sitting in the dirt. 3 days after Isaac vanished, the house appeared again. This time in a suburb 50 miles away, squatting at the end of a cull. sat like it had always been there. No one in the neighborhood remembered it being built. There were no property records, no previous owners, no construction permits. But there it was, settled comfortably between two freshly painted homes, as if it belonged, and no one questioned it. Not at first. Children avoided it instinctively. Dogs refused to go near it, growling low and constant if dragged close. The mailman skipped the address entirely, and at night, porch lights would flicker on their own, sometimes in patterns that seemed intentional, deliberate, like Morse code, tapped out in trembling light. The house never changed on the outside. Weathered siding, boarded windows, a porch swing that creaked in the wind, even when the air was dead still. But inside, it shifted, always, room by room, hour by hour. People who dared step through the front door found themselves somewhere else entirely, like Marcus Linden. He was a contractor, had been hired by the city to inspect the place once word got around that the house technically didn't exist. They didn't say it like that, of course. They said it was unregistered, that it might be a squatter's den or an illegal structure. He didn't ask questions. He showed up with a clipboard, a flashlight, and the worn confidence of a man who'd walked through dozens of decrepit buildings and always made it out fine. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. He stepped inside, boots sinking into thick carpet that squelched underfoot. He clicked on his flashlight and immediately felt the temperature drop. Not just cold, wrong. The kind of cold that settled inside your spine and whispered that something wasn't right with the world. The entryway was simple: staircase to the right, hallway to the left, open living room ahead. But as he took a step forward, the entire house groaned, walls flexing, wood stretching. He paused, unsure if he'd imagined it. Just settling, he muttered. Old beams. He tried to mark his location on his clipboard, but the paper had gone damp in the span of seconds. He peeled it away, confused. That's when he noticed the walls. They were moving. Not quickly, not overtly, but enough. The wallpaper bubbled in and out, like breath pushing through wet fabric. Something tapped on the inside of the plaster. Once, twice. A pause. Then 3 times rapidly, like fingers trying to remember how to knock. Marcus turned in place, unsure which way he'd come in. The entryway was gone. The front door replaced by another hallway, this one narrower, with doors on either side spaced evenly like a hotel corridor. He tried to retrace his steps, but found only more hallway, more doors, each with a small brass plate etched with numbers that didn't make sense. Room Zoo, Room 7B, Room 17B1. He picked one at random and opened it. The room inside was an exact replica of his childhood bedroom, right down to the crooked Raiders poster and the spider-shaped crack in the ceiling. He hadn't thought about that room in 20 years. And yet, here it was, preserved like a museum exhibit. The TV on the floor clicked on by itself. Static. Then a voice. His voice. You should have listened, it said. He slammed the door shut, breathing hard. The house exhaled. That's the only way he could describe it. Like being caught in the gust of something enormous sighing inches from your ear. The walls trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling in clouds. The lights flickered, dimmed, then cut out entirely. Darkness surged forward like a tide, and his flashlight sputtered, then went cold. Panic settled into his chest like a stone. He fumbled along the wall until his fingers touched something smooth. Wood. Another door. He pushed through it, and stepped into a grocery store aisle. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Shelves lined both sides, filled with rotten food and boxes with no labels. The air stank of mildew and something worse, something sharp and coppery. A shopping cart sat at the far end of the aisle. Something moved behind it. Hello, Marcus called. No answer. He took a step forward and the lights above him shut off, one by one, following him down the aisle like a stalking predator. He turned to run, but the floor had turned to tile slick with something viscous. He slipped, hit the ground, tasted blood, and then the aisle ended and he was back in the house. back in the hallway, back where he started. Except it wasn't the same hallway. This one had no doors, only walls covered in mirrors. All of them warped, some shattered. Each reflection twisted, wrong, limbs too long, eyes too black, smiles too wide. And in one of them, a face he hadn't seen in years. Isaac, smiling, bleeding. "Welcome," the reflection whispered. "You came back. We remember you." Marcus stumbled away from the mirror and ran, and ran, and ran. But the house didn't let him leave. 3 days later, his van was still parked outside, keys in the ignition. Radio still playing softly on a dead battery. His clipboard was found in the yard, pages soaked through with what looked like salt water. They never found him, just like they never found Isaac. But the house remained. The neighborhood ignored it. Realtors worked around it. Maps skipped the address. But some nights, if you walked past just before dawn, you could hear sounds through the walls. Footsteps, whispers, a child laughing, and always, the faint creak of the porch swing, moving on its own in the still air. No one entered after Marcus, not for a long time. But the house wasn't worried. It had time. It always did. It started with a photograph. Not a new one. Not even one that should have mattered. It was an old picture, stuck between the pages of a donated paperback at the Brookwell Public Library. The book was a battered copy of Great Expectations, dropped off with a box of others by a local hospice nurse cleaning out the apartment of a patient who'd passed. The librarian, Marlene, found it while sorting donations. At first, she thought it was a misplaced Polaroid, just a faded shot of a white 2-story house with boarded windows and an overgrown yard. Unremarkable, really, until she noticed the girl in the window. Small, maybe 7 or 8. Pale, wearing what looked like a nightgown soaked at the hem. Her hand was pressed against the glass, eyes staring directly at the camera. But it wasn't just her expression, it was the angle. The way she looked down at the lens. The picture had clearly been taken from the ground, but the girl's face wasn't distorted by the glass. It was perfectly clear, like she was standing right in front of the photographer, inches away. Marlene stared at the photo for a long time. Then she flipped it over. One word was scrawled on the back in faded ink: help. That night, Marlene dreamed of the house. She was standing in front of it. Fog clung to her ankles. The trees around her were skeletal, leafless, and the sky hung low, thick with the color of bruises. The porch creaked without wind. The swing moved slowly. The front door was ajar. She felt something in her hand and looked down. It was the photograph. But the girl in the window was gone. And when she looked up, she was at the window instead, staring down at herself. She woke gasping, sweat-soaked and trembling. The photo was still on her nightstand where she'd left it, but it felt heavier. As if the ink had thickened, the image deepened. She turned it over again. Now it said, "Don't forget me." She called the hospice nurse the next morning, but the number was disconnected. The building where the patient had lived, an old apartment block near the edge of town, was already gutted. Demo crew had moved in a week prior. Marlene drove there anyway, stared at the rubble, nothing but dust and twisted beams. She told herself the photo was probably just an accident, a misplaced old family picture. But deep down, she knew better. The girl hadn't been in the house when the photo was taken. She had been in the photo. Marlene tried to forget. She tucked the picture back inside Great Expectations and shelved the book in the lowest corner of the classic section, half buried where no one would find it. But she kept dreaming. The house appeared again, and again. Always the same porch swing creaking, fog rolling, that sense of pressure behind the windows like something was watching, waiting. On the third night, she saw her. Not in the dream, in real life. Marlene had closed up the library, was locking the back door, when she saw a figure on the sidewalk across the street. A little girl, pale, wearing a nightgown, soaked at the hem, staring at her. Marlene didn't move, didn't speak. She only blinked. And in that fraction of a second, the girl vanished. She told herself it was exhaustion, lack of sleep, stress. But when she got home, Great Expectations was on her kitchen table. She hadn't taken it, hadn't thought about it since shelving it. Her keys dropped from her hand. Her mouth opened in a wordless sound. She didn't pick the book up, didn't touch it. But she didn't throw it away either. That night, the dream changed. She was inside the house. The air smelled of wet wood and old rot, walls peeled with black mold. The floor shifted like damp sand. She moved room to room, each one older than the last. Victorian parlor, 1920s kitchen, 1950s nursery. Decades stacked on each other like skins. And in every room, there was a window, and in every window her own reflection stared back. Except it wasn't a reflection, it was her, staring out. Trapped. Pounding her fists on the glass. Screaming but silent. She awoke sobbing, and when she looked in the mirror beside her bed, for just one flicker, just a heartbeat, her reflection didn't copy her movement. It smiled. A week later, the book was checked out. A local high school student, looking for a last-minute title for his lit essay. He never returned it. Marlene asked around. No one had seen him since Friday. His car was still in the school parking lot. His phone went straight to voicemail. The police searched his house. Found nothing except a photo. Sitting on the kitchen table, a house with boarded windows, a girl in the glass. Only now, there were two. One in the upstairs window, and one staring out from the basement. Marlene never went back to the library. She stopped answering calls, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. When her sister finally visited, she found the apartment empty, dust on the windowsills, the TV frozen on static, one book on the coffee table, Great Expectations, with a single photo inside. Now 3 girls stared out from the windows, each one with Marlene's eyes, each one whispering the same thing: if you pressed your ear to the page, don't look too long, or you'll remember. Because the house was always there, waiting behind every photograph, every dream, every mirror. And with every glance, every whisper, it pulled someone closer, one window at a time. The first thing Daniel noticed was the smell. It wasn't strong at first, just a hint of something metallic and old, like a basement that hadn't seen light in 100 years. He dismissed it as mildew, maybe a dead rat in the crawl space, until it grew stronger. It clung to the back of his throat, invaded his nose no matter how deep he breathed. After a while, it stopped smelling like something dead and started smelling like something remembered. A scent that didn't belong in the present, but somewhere deeper than memory had permission to go. Daniel didn't know it yet, but the house had chosen him. He lived alone, on the edge of town, in a rented single story he barely paid attention to. His life was quiet, predictable. Wake up, work, home, sleep, repeat. No drama, no strange events. He liked it that way. Until the door appeared. It was in his hallway. One morning, it simply existed. Wedged between his bedroom and the bathroom, where there had always been a blank wall. At first he assumed he'd somehow missed it, that maybe the previous tenant had covered it with furniture or a sheet of drywall. But there was no denying how wrong it looked. The wood was darker than the other doors in the house. The knob was brass, but dulled by age, and etched with a shape he didn't recognize. An open eye with a line drawn through it, like a warning or a dare. He tried the knob. Locked. Of course it was. But every time he passed it, on the way to brush his teeth, on the way back from the kitchen, he heard something. A faint tap, then silence. Sometimes a scrape, sometimes breathing. The landlord didn't answer his calls. The property manager swore the door had never existed. The blueprints didn't mention a closet, room, or passage. But still it stood there, as real and solid as the rest of the house, demanding to be acknowledged. He ignored it for 3 days. On the 4th, the door was open. Just a crack. Just enough to see the edge of darkness waiting on the other side. He didn't go in. He slammed it shut and shoved a chair in front of it. But that night, he woke up to find the chair tipped over, the door wide open again. Still, he didn't look inside. Just shut it again, wedged it with a heavy bookshelf, and drank himself to sleep on the couch with the TV volume at full. The next morning, the bookshelf was in the kitchen, upside down, and the door was wider open. Now the smell was back, stronger, sticking to the walls, to his skin. He scrubbed the hallway, sprayed disinfectant, lit candles. Nothing helped. It wasn't just smell anymore. It was presence. He started seeing things out of the corner of his eye. Shapes darting just out of reach. Shadows that moved opposite the light. Faces in mirrors that didn't belong to him. He set up his phone to record. Propped it on the hallway table, aimed straight at the door. The footage was normal at first. 4 hours of stillness. Then, around 3:17 a.m., that same cursed time Isaac's watch had broken at. The footage stuttered, glitched, froze. The timestamp scrambled. And then something stepped into frame. Not clearly. Never clearly. The shape was wrong. Tall, with joints bending the wrong way. Hands that dragged on the floor. No face, only a stretch of pale skin where a face should have been. It didn't open the door. It stepped out of it, paused, and turned toward the camera. The frame went black. The phone was fried. Battery bloated. Screen cracked. The plastic back melted like it had been pressed against something too hot. Daniel stared at it for a long time, numb. His legs were shaking, but his mind refused to let the panic take root. He told himself he'd leave. Just walk away. Move. Sleep in his car. Burn the house down. But that night, he sat in front of the door. Alone, waiting, because somewhere deep inside a whisper was growing. You need to look. You need to remember. So he did. He turned the knob. The door opened slowly, creaking like something exhaling from a long sleep. The room beyond wasn't a room at all. It was a hallway. Stone. Damp. Lit by flickering torches that shouldn't have worked. And at the end of it, barely visible, was another door. He stepped inside. The door shut behind him. The hallway was longer than it should have been. Miles, maybe? Every few feet, there was another door. All locked. All pulsing faintly like organs. Some throbbed when he passed. One whispered. Another bled beneath the frame. He didn't touch them. Didn't dare. Until he reached the final one. It was metal. Rust-covered. Heavy. Bolted with 6 locks that unlatched one by one as he approached, without him lifting a finger. The door opened. He stepped into a room that was not a room. It was a field. Twilight sky above. Grass swaying in wind that made no sound. And in the center of the field, a house. That house. Isaac's house. The house that changed, that grew, that remembered. It was smaller here. Childlike. Like it was pretending to be harmless. Daniel walked toward it. The air smelled like ash and wet wood. The closer he got, the more the world warped. The sky blood colors he couldn't name. The grass whispered in voices that sounded like his mother, his ex-girlfriend, a teacher he'd forgotten until this moment. He opened the door and found himself in his own childhood bedroom. Every detail was perfect. The posters, the scuffed desk, the shoebox full of old comic books. But something moved under the bed. He crouched slowly, heart hammering, and found a single object, a Polaroid, of a girl, staring from a window. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, stood a man with no face. He turned the photo over. One word in smeared ink, Ron. But it was too late. The door behind him had vanished. The walls were breathing. And the house had found someone new to remember. The house was inside him now. Daniel could feel it. Not like a sickness, not like a metaphor, literally. It was in his bones, in his skin, behind his eyes. Every breath he took felt like he was inhaling rotten smoke. When he closed his eyes, he didn't see darkness. He saw blueprints, angles that shouldn't exist, rooms stacked on top of each other like broken vertebrae, staircases that spiraled into places light couldn't reach. And beneath it all, always a heartbeat, slow, ancient, patient. He wasn't sure how long he'd been in the bedroom. Time didn't work in the house. The light through the window never changed. The sky outside was always some twisted in, between shade, part sunset, part bruise. The photo he found had disappeared after he blinked. Now there was only the silence. And the crawl space. It was behind the dresser. A square wooden panel, perfectly flush with the wall. He hadn't seen it at first, even though it had been there the whole time. He only noticed it because the wall had started breathing again, rising and falling like a sleeping chest. And then the panel moved. Not open. Moved. Like something behind it had shifted against the wood, impatient. He knew he shouldn't touch it. But he also knew it didn't matter, because it was already open the next time he turned around. Darkness yawned from the hole, not the absence of light. A presence. Heavy watching, waiting. The smell was stronger now, wet concrete blood, something sweet and decayed. The kind of smell that clung to old hospitals and the back of butcher shops. The kind of smell you don't forget because some part of you recognizes it as a warning left behind by something older than fear. He crouched, slowly, and peered inside. The crawl space went deeper than it should have. Much deeper. He reached inside. His hand passed the threshold and was immediately swallowed by cold. His breath caught. Something brushed his fingertips. Something soft. Something alive. And then it whispered. Not in words. In memory. A surge of images crashed through him. His father's funeral, his first kiss. The dog he'd buried in the woods behind his house when he was 12. But the memories weren't quite right. The details were off. His father's casket had been empty. The girl's mouth was sewn shut. The dog's eyes were still open, watching. He yanked his hand back, gasping. But the crawlspace had grown. Wider now. Taller, like it had tasted his curiosity and wanted more. He should have run, but he didn't. Instead, he slid inside. The crawlspace swallowed him in one slow breath. He was crawling now, elbows scraping against damp wood. The space around him was too tight, but it pulsed. Expanded, contracted, like he was inside a throat that hadn't decided whether to choke or swallow. He kept moving. He couldn't stop. Behind him, the way back had closed. Ahead, faint red light flickered. He reached a chamber, small, low-ceilinged, lined with insulation that blood. In the center was a figure curled into a fetal position, rocking gently. It was him, Daniel. Or something that looked exactly like him, except the skin was too pale, the mouth too wide, and the eyes were missing. Not hollow, not gouged, just gone, like the face had forgotten to finish growing. He crawled closer. The figure stopped rocking. Its head snapped up, and it screamed. The sound was wrong. Not loud, not painful, just final, like something ending that didn't have a name. Daniel clutched his head, curled into himself, but the sound didn't stop. It filled the crawl space, turned the walls to rippling flesh, made the wood crack and bleed. He could taste it, iron and smoke and old paper. He screamed back. When the sound finally died, he was alone. The double was gone, but something else had taken its place. A door, painted red, wet, breathing. The knob was shaped like a human heart. It was beating. He didn't want to touch it, but he already was. His hand moved on its own, palm pressed to the warm, pulsing brass. The door opened, and the house changed again. He stood now in a long corridor of mirrors, hundreds of them. No frames. Just slabs of glass nailed to the walls, floor, ceiling. Each one reflected something different. Not just versions of him, but versions of the house. Some were rotting. Some on fire. One was upside down. One was underwater. In every reflection, something was always watching. He walked. He didn't count the mirrors. Didn't want to. Because after a while, they stopped reflecting him. They showed someone else. A man in a black suit, faceless, walking just a step behind. He turned. No one there. But in the mirrors, the man kept coming closer. Closer. Every mirror, every step, until finally Daniel reached the end. Another door. This one was made of flesh, stitched with hair and teeth and glass. It pulsed beneath his touch. He opened it, and walked into a memory that wasn't his. A hospital room. Lights flickering. Beeping machines. A girl in the bed, her face pale and twisted in pain. Tubes in her arms. Eyes vacant. Her name on the chart, Anna. He didn't know her. But she knew him. She turned her head, smiled, and said, "You brought it with you." He staggered back. The lights burst. And when the world went black, he heard it again. The heartbeat. Slower now. Sated. For now. He woke up in his hallway. In front of the strange door. It was gone. But his hands were still bleeding. And somewhere, deep in the house's belly, a new crawl space opened. Waiting. Because once you enter, the house remembers you. And it always leaves a door open. Just in case. The walls had changed. Daniel didn't notice it at first. Not directly. But he could feel it. A subtle shift in the angles. A faint pressure behind the drywall, like the studs were breathing. His house was still his house. Same furniture, same crooked kitchen cabinet. Same scuff marks on the floor where the couch had been dragged too many times. But something beneath the surface was different. The kind of difference that made silence feel louder. The kind that made you pause in your own hallway and squint at your ceiling, just to make sure it hadn't moved. After the crawl space, he hadn't tried to leave. Not once. It wasn't because he didn't want to. He did. He tried. Opened the front door to find himself staring at the inside of his garage. Opened the garage door and found only another hallway. Opened a hallway closet and saw his front porch. But empty, colorless, flickering like it was made of old film. The house had folded in on itself. Or maybe it had grown too large. The outside world didn't matter anymore. There was no outside world. Not for him. Sleep was a joke. The dreams were worse now. Sometimes he'd dream he was still inside the crawl space, moving inch by inch, trying not to breathe too loud. Other times he'd wake up in his bed, thinking it was morning, only to blink and find himself still dreaming. He started leaving himself notes. "This is real," scribbled in pen on his wrist, or "Don't trust her," carved into the bathroom mirror. The worst part was he didn't remember writing any of them. And then the knocking started. At first, it was faint. 3 sharp taps behind the walls, like someone rapping knuckles on the other side of a door. He thought it was the pipes. He even shut off the water, just to check. The sound continued. Then it changed locations. One night it came from the attic. The next, from under the floorboards in the hallway. Once, while brushing his teeth. The knocking came from inside the medicine cabinet. When he opened it, there was only his reflection. But it was smiling. He set up cameras again. Didn't matter. Every recording was blank after 3:17 a.m. A blank slate of static and silence. But when he fast-forwarded through one of them, just once, he saw something, a frame, barely there, of someone crawling across the ceiling above his bed. Backward. Head turned completely around. Watching. He didn't sleep after that. By the 4th day, the walls began to whisper. Not words, not clearly. Just the suggestion of breath. Syllables half-formed, like people talking just out of earshot, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, sometimes a baby's coo. He pressed his ear against the drywall and heard breathing on the other side. Heavy, measured, close. That was the first time he saw the drag marks. He found them in the guest room. Long, dark streaks in the carpet leading from the window to the wall. As if something had been pulled into it. There were no footprints. Just the deep indentation of fingers where they'd scraped the floor, resisting whatever had taken them. He followed the trail. It ended at the far wall, just beneath the painting he'd bought at a garage sale years ago. A landscape of a lake at dusk, except now the painting wasn't of a lake. It was the house. The same one. Windowless, sinking into the dirt. Watching. He took the painting down. Behind it, the wallpaper was torn. And underneath, a hole. Not large, maybe the size of a dinner plate, but deep. Too deep. He grabbed a flashlight, pointed it inside. It wasn't a wall cavity. It was a tunnel. He called out. "Hello." Something moved. He heard fingernails scraping toward him. Slow. wet. He stepped back, heart in his throat. Something blinked inside the tunnel. He dropped the flashlight, ran, boarded up the guest room, nailed the door shut, moved the bookshelf in front of it. It didn't help. That night, the sound came again. Not tapping, walking, slow, careful, inside the walls, following him from room to room. He stayed in the living room for hours, back to the fireplace, watching every corner. The silence wasn't silent anymore. It was a presence, watching, waiting. Then, just before dawn, the drywall cracked, slow and deliberate. Something pushed through. A hand, not human. Too many knuckles. Fingers too long. Skin pale, slick like it had been left in water too long. It reached out blindly, groping along the baseboard like it was searching. Then another hand. Daniel couldn't scream. He couldn't move. The wall tore wider. A face pushed through next. Eyes black and too large. Mouth open far too wide. It looked like him. A ruined version. Burned. Broken. But still him. And it spoke without moving its lips. You're in the blueprint now. The wall sealed back up like flesh healing over a wound. Gone. He vomited in the sink. Sat on the floor until the sun came through the window. Not warm, not real, but light nonetheless. Later, when he found the courage to move again, he went to the hallway. Scratched into the drywall, running from one end of the house to the other, where 5 words were walking, behind the eyes. And from that day on, Daniel never looked at his walls the same way again. Because he knew he wasn't alone. He never had been. For days, Daniel avoided the mirrors. Every reflective surface in the house, every chrome faucet, TV screen, polished doorknob, he draped with towels, bed sheets, old clothes. He didn't want to see himself. He didn't want to see it. The thing that wore his face, that crawled through walls, that whispered when the lights were off. He knew if he caught its eyes again, even for a second, something inside him would crack in a way that couldn't be undone. But he'd forgotten about the window. It was a tall, narrow thing above the kitchen sink. He never paid much attention to it, never needed to. It faced his backyard fence, offering nothing but a view of weather, beaten slats and the occasional squirrel. But on the 6th day after the wall, thing came through. The glass changed. He saw it while washing his hands, head low, eyes avoiding his reflection in the faucet. Something about the light felt wrong, warmer, redder. The sky had gone dark only minutes before, but now it seemed like dusk had reversed itself. He glanced up and froze. There was someone in the yard, a little girl, standing perfectly still just outside the window, pale skin, long dark hair, feet bare in the winter grass. Her nightgown hung soaked at the hem, like she'd been wading through a river. Her face was still, expressionless, but her eyes, they were wide. Not with fear, with recognition. Daniel backed away from the sink, water still running. The girl didn't move. She didn't blink. He crossed the kitchen in slow, trembling steps, reached for the blinds, then stopped. She wasn't standing on the other side of the glass. She was inside it. Her feet didn't touch the ground. They hovered just inches above the dirt, like she was suspended behind the pane, trapped in the frame like an insect in amber. And slowly, her hand lifted and touched the glass from the inside. The surface rippled. He stumbled back. His mind reeled for something rational, some explanation, a trick of light, a stress-induced vision. But the girl's hand moved again. Her mouth opened, and fog bloomed across the glass from inside. She wrote a word in it. Open. Daniel turned and ran. He locked every door, every window. Checked every nail he'd hammered into the walls. He buried the flashlight, tossed the batteries, smashed the clock that always read 3:17. But none of it mattered. That night he dreamed of the window. He was standing in front of it, looking out over a vast field. In the distance, the house stood, bare, old, sinking into the dirt like it had been trying to disappear for centuries, but had never quite succeeded. And in the window was the girl again, her mouth moving, her hands pressed flat. He tried to look away, But the glass bent his reflection, pulling him back in. Then behind her something rose. Not a man, not a beast, just presence. Massive, slow, towering. It unfolded from the shadows like a sail catching wind, its head scraping the ceiling, its limbs too long and thin to carry anything human. It leaned down, whispered something in the girl's ear. She nodded and pointed at him. Daniel woke screaming. The window was open. The cold breeze blew through the kitchen, stirring the curtains. He hadn't touched the latch. He never opened that window. It didn't even have a screen. He stared at the space where the glass should have been, and in the condensation that clung to the frame. 5 words were scrawled in perfect handwriting. "We saw you first, Daniel." He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor, back to the fridge, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the empty window frame. But nothing came, just wind. Just quiet, just that low, endless thrum of the house breathing through its wood. By morning, the window was closed again. No latch, no crack, just sealed, as though it had never opened at all. He checked the backyard. No footprints, no girl. But just before turning back inside, he saw something carved into the fence post. A series of tally marks, 5 long lines. The 6th still fresh, still bleeding. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the floorboards, the reflection returned. Not in the mirror, not in the sink, in the window. Daniel saw himself standing in the yard, staring up at the glass, expressionless. Still, he reached out, and the reflection did not mimic him. It smiled, and pressed its palm to the glass. From behind him, inside the house, he heard the same whisper that had echoed through so many doors, so many dreams open, because the house no longer needed to come for him. Now, it only needed him to let it in. Daniel hadn't gone near the attic since he moved into the house. Not because it frightened him. Back then, it hadn't. He simply hadn't needed to. The hatch above the hallway had remained untouched, the string dangling like a forgotten thought, swinging ever so slightly when the heat came on or the floorboards shifted. But now it pulled at him, not just metaphorically. It physically pulled. An invisible gravity that grew stronger with each day, whispering upward from above the ceiling with a promise he didn't want, and a question he couldn't stop hearing in his head. What did you leave up there? The dreams had gotten worse. He no longer jolted awake. He simply slipped from one layer of dream into another, like nesting dolls carved from rot and static. In some dreams, he was still a child, standing in front of a door he was too scared to open. In others, he was already inside the house, the real house, the one stitched together from grief and memory and things too old to have names. Always, there were voices. Always, they came from above. The walls knew he was considering it. That night, they hummed. Not with electricity, but with tension. When he leaned against them, they felt warmer than his skin. The floorboards didn't creak. They shuddered. Shadows didn't just move, they moved toward him. And above all of it, just above the ceiling, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Too heavy to be his. Too patient to be animal. He stood beneath the attic hatch for a full hour before reaching up. The string felt damp in his hand, like it had been soaking in something it shouldn't. He pulled it, and the ladder came down in slow, stiff jerks. The air from above poured down like a sigh, stale, thick, carrying the scent of forgotten fabric and something sweeter. Something wrong, he climbed. Each rung groaned like a complaint. At the top, he paused. The attic was dark, not pitch black, just murky. The kind of darkness that had shape, mass. His flashlight flickered even before he turned it on, sputtering against the air like it didn't want to exist here. When the beam finally held, he swept it across the space. Boxes. Dust. Cobwebs thick as rope. Nothing moved. Until he blinked. Then something shifted. He couldn't be sure what. The angle of the shadows, maybe. Or the placement of a box. A memory he didn't know he'd had twisted just slightly out of alignment. He stepped inside, careful, the insulation crunching underfoot. That's when he saw the door. It was small, half the height of a regular door, wedged into the far corner behind a row of forgotten suitcases and a broken rocking horse. He hadn't seen it a second ago, but it had always been there. He knew that. Deep down in the oldest part of his brain, he remembered. The door was red, faded, splintering at the edges. A child's handprint stained the wood in dark brown. It didn't have a knob, only a keyhole, and as he approached, he realized something awful. He had the key. It was in his pocket. He didn't know how it had gotten there. He didn't even remember ever seeing it before. But it was old, brass, cold, with that same open eye carved into the base. His hands moved before his thoughts could catch up. The key slid in perfectly. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The world inside wasn't the attic. It was a hallway. But not like the others. This one pulsed with color. The walls were painted with childlike drawings, crayon rainbows, stick figures, animals with too many eyes. But the longer he looked, the more the drawings changed. The rainbows melted. The stick figures reached out of the walls. One drawing blinked. Another grinned. The figures were screaming now, mouths open in wide, black voids. He walked forward. The floor beneath his feet was soft, almost sponge-like. It gave slightly with each step, as though he were walking on damp flesh. The air buzzed, faintly charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. Somewhere far ahead, a music box played, notes too slow, too broken. Then the hallway ended, in a room, a nursery, no lights, just the glow from an unseen source that bathed everything in sickly gold. Toys lay scattered across the floor. A mobile hung from the ceiling, spinning without wind. In the center of the room was a crib, and inside it, he almost couldn't move. His limbs refused, because inside the crib was him, a baby, sleeping, breathing. And standing over the crib was the girl, the same one from the window. She turned to face him. This time her face was clearer, not blank, not lifeless, sad. Her eyes were too old for her body, deep with something he couldn't name. "You forgot this part," she said softly. I don't understand," he whispered. "Yes, you do." She turned back to the crib. This was the first time it looked at you. The real first time. Before the fire, before the dreams, before the mirrors. It saw you before you could understand what you were seeing. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer. She stepped back. The mobile stopped spinning. The baby opened its eyes, and they were his. Grown, terrified, bleeding, the baby screamed, not like an infant, but like something ancient and dying. The room cracked, walls peeled back like skin. The nursery dissolved, and he was back in the attic. Only now he was on the ceiling. Gravity had reversed. His hands clung to beams slick with some dark, dripping fluid. Below him, or above him, the floor wreathed with movement. Shadows that walked like men, figures with their faces removed. One looked up. It had his reflection, but no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Only a flat pane of glass where the face should be. It raised a hand, and Daniel felt his own body lift. He was falling upward or downward. He couldn't tell. The attic spun. He hit the floor hard, gasped, looked up. The red door was gone. The boxes were untouched. The light was steady. The attic was normal. But in his hand was the key, still warm, still pulsing, and carved into the palm of his hand were 5 words, etched in fresh, angry red. The first time wasn't first. He didn't sleep after that. The next night, the floorboards whispered, not tapped, not creaked, whispered his name. Again and again, Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. He lay in bed with his eyes open, watching the ceiling fan spin, knowing that any second it might stop, that the room might fold again, that the house would want another memory, another secret, another piece of him. And then it came. Not through the attic, through the closet. A crack in the wall split open, slow and deliberate. Light spilled out, but not white light, not gold, red. Inside he saw another door. This one was made of glass, and behind the glass, a mirror. And behind the mirror, himself, smiling. And this time, the reflection spoke with certainty. No more hiding, Daniel. You've already opened every door. He stood, walked to the closet, stared at the glass. Behind it, his reflection reached out, and the wall behind him rippled. Not like water, like skin, like the house was waking up. He stepped inside, because there was no more hiding. There never had been, and the attic, that was just the beginning. It started speaking to him in the walls, not whispers now, words. Real, jagged, stuttering words that crackled like broken speakers and left a metallic taste in Daniel's mouth whenever he heard them. They didn't come all at once. At first, it was only his name, cut off halfway through, spoken in a voice that sounded like his but chewed through something raw. Then came phrases. You left the door open. We saw your shadow. She remembers what you forgot. The walls didn't echo anymore. They replied. He stopped trying to leave. There was nowhere to go. The front door led to the basement now. The bathroom opened into the kitchen, but not the current kitchen. An older version. One with yellowed linoleum and a fridge he hadn't owned in 10 years. At one point, he tried to smash through a window with a chair. The glass didn't break. It rippled, swallowed the chair, and spat it back out moments later. Burnt, wet, and bent into a shape he couldn't recognize. He didn't try again. Food tasted like ash. Water ran cold, then black, then not at all. The house didn't want him dead. It wanted him awake. Aware. It wanted him listening. The television came on by itself that night. He didn't own a TV anymore. Hadn't in years. But there it was in the living room, a wood-paneled box with dials, thick glass, the kind he remembered from his grandmother's house. It was already buzzing with static when he entered the room. No picture. No sound. Just that low, endless hiss, and underneath it, the heartbeat again. Thump. Thump. Steady. Patient. He approached slowly, each step heavy. The screen shimmered. Then it blinked. He didn't imagine it. The static blinked, like an eye. Daniel, it said in a dozen voices at once. His mother's, his own. The girl's, someone he didn't recognize but somehow feared. You've walked in every room but one. I've seen it all, he whispered. The static laughed, a sound like bones snapping underwater. You've only seen what we let you remember. The screen flickered, then flashed. He saw images, too quick, too sharp. A hand holding a lit match. A child's shoe half buried in soot. A reflection in a puddle that moved before he did. A figure standing in the corner of every room he'd ever slept in, always there, always just out of view. Then one image stayed. A house. Not the one he'd seen again and again, but a new one. Unfinished, empty windows, no roof. A hollow skeleton on the edge of a fogged over cliff, and behind it not land, teeth. Mountains made of teeth, closing in slow. The screen popped. Smoked. He stepped back as sparks danced from the dial, but the house wasn't done. The lights flickered. The wallpaper peeled. Every mirror in the house shattered at once, not with violence, but in sequence, like dominoes made of glass. And behind the broken mirrors, instead of walls, were eyes, unblinking. Watching. You invited us, they whispered. No, Daniel muttered. I never wanted this. You did, they said together. You asked the first question. You opened the first door. We only answered. He stumbled backward into the hallway. The house stretched. Literally. The walls pulled farther apart, and new doors sprouted where there had been none. All of them opened slowly as he passed, revealing rooms from other lives, other people. Rooms that belonged to strangers who had lived, and died, and remembered. One room was a hospital operating theater, empty. Except for the child's drawing on the far wall, of a man with no face and too many arms. One room was an office, dust covering a desk filled with reports labeled Cognitive Collapse, Subject 47. One room was a nursery. Silent. Still. The mobile spinning without air. He stepped into that one. The air was warmer here. Denser. The crib was empty. But there was something on the floor. A recorder. He picked it up. It was already playing. Oh, Daniel, it crackled. Oh, not safe anymore. Too many entries. You crossed into the structure. Now it's writing you. The voice was his own. Panicked. Weak. You don't leave the house. You become it. The tape stopped. He looked at the walls. There were no walls anymore. Only rooms. Endless rooms, stitched together by memory and rot. Each one waiting, each one hungry. He stepped out into the hallway again, but it wasn't a hallway. It was a spinal column, stretching through an endless space filled with whispering wind and shifting shadows. The house was alive, not metaphorically, not symbolically. Alive in the oldest way something could be, by feeding, by collecting, by becoming. And it had become him. He turned. A mirror was behind him, unbroken, clear. His reflection didn't match him. It was wearing a suit, face clean, calm, smiling. You're almost finished, it said. Finished with what? Your remembering, your design. I don't understand. You don't have to. That's not your part. Then the mirror cracked. Not shattered, cracked. A thin fissure down the center. Then another, and another. From the cracks, words bled out like ink. It was never a house. It was always a pattern. Daniel stepped back. The lights surged. Then died. He stood in total darkness. No sound, no breath, no thought, until something touched his shoulder. Soft. Human. A child's hand. He turned. The girl from the window stood there, eyes wide and wet. You're the last, she said. The last what? Keyhole. The floor opened beneath him. He fell, and fell, and fell, through memories not his, through voices and rooms and staircases, through decades and dreams and glass. He landed in a room. No doors, no windows, only a table, and a mirror, and a house drawn in crayon on the floor, and a name written in shaky handwriting beside it. Daniel, because the house had been waiting to remember itself. Through him. Daniel was still, not by choice, but by design. The room he'd fallen into had no sound, no airflow, no sensation beyond the dull hum beneath the floorboards that pulsed every few seconds, like a distant heartbeat pounding through concrete. The only light came from above, soft, gray, sourceless, and it cast no shadows. Time didn't pass here, not in any way that could be counted. There were no windows, no exits. Only the table, the mirror, and the childlike crayon drawing on the floor. The house with too many windows and no front door. The mirror had changed. It no longer showed his reflection. It showed the hallway he'd just come from, but in reverse. The frames on the wall were hung backward. The rug that had once been soaked in something black was now pristine. And something was standing there. Something tall, thin, faceless. Its fingers stretched so far they scraped the baseboards as it moved. It wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking into it. At him. He turned away from the mirror. His name was still scrawled on the floor in uneven strokes, Daniel. But below it, a second name had appeared. Architect. The crayon had moved. He hadn't touched it, but it had written. Just once. Just enough to change everything. The hum beneath the floor deepened. The mirror flickered, then shattered, not with sound, but with feeling, like something had screamed in reverse. The shards didn't fall. They hung in the air, suspended, spinning slowly as if caught in invisible water. Each one reflected a different version of the house on fire, underwater, suspended in fog. One shard showed it upside down. Another showed it inverted, the rooms outside, the sky inside. And in every version, Daniel was there, watching, waiting, smiling. The floor cracked beneath him. He didn't fall. He sank, slowly, like being pulled into wet clay. It sucked at his ankles, his knees, his chest, until his entire body slipped into a corridor he hadn't seen before. This one was narrow. Stone walls, uneven and wet. The only light came from exposed bulbs hanging by frayed wires. They buzzed erratically, casting strobe like flashes that turned every movement into something unnatural. He walked. There was no other option. The corridor curved in impossible ways. Angles bent without logic. Sometimes the floor tilted sideways, forcing him to crawl. Other times it dropped into shallow steps that led upward before folding in on themselves, doubling back without warning. The house was looping again, but not randomly. It was showing him something. A path. Not forward, not backward, inward. He reached a landing. There were stairs now. Old wood, water damaged, sinking beneath his weight. They didn't go up or down. They twisted into themselves. Like a bias strip rendered in oak and wrought, a voice greeted him. Not from above, not from behind, from within. You're almost home. He paused. I don't know what that means. The voice chuckled softly. Not mocking, fond. It means you've remembered enough. We can finish building now. He climbed. The staircase never ended, not because it went on forever, but because it looped. Every 100 steps, he'd pass the same broken banister, the same flickering bulb, the same blood smear on the wall that spelled his name wrong, Daniel. But each loop was slightly different. The smear bled more. The bulb buzzed louder. The steps cracked deeper. He wasn't walking through space. He was walking through decay, through himself. By the 4th loop, he stopped feeling hunger. By the 6th, his skin had paled. By the 10th, he wasn't sure if his legs were still moving, or if the staircase had begun moving beneath him, carrying him like a conveyor belt toward something inevitable. Then came the door, not one he recognized. This one was metal, pitted, riveted like it belonged in a submarine. A circular window in the center showed only static. It was sealed tight. No knob, no lock, only a nameplate EXIT. But the house didn't have exits. It had endings. The voice returned, softer now. Do you want to leave? He didn't answer. He pressed his hand to the door. It was warm. Then it opened on its own, and he stepped through, into a room made of stairs. Hundreds of staircases, intersecting at every possible angle. Some ran sideways, others curved into the ceiling. A few bled. All of them led somewhere, but none of those places were ground. The sky above was black, punctured by windows. Each window showed a memory. He watched himself, as a boy, hiding under a table while his parents screamed. He watched himself again at 17, walking out of a house and never looking back, while something in the upstairs window stared down. He watched himself as a man, seeing the mirror for the first time, touching the door, opening it. The house hadn't followed him. He'd built it. One forgotten thing at a time. Another voice joined the first. This one was familiar. His sister. It was never just your story. He turned. She stood across the stair room, balanced on a floating step like a dancer on a thread. Her eyes were too wide, her mouth too still, but her voice was hers. You let it remember you, she said. Now it's remembering through you. I didn't mean to. You did. You wanted answers. You wanted to know where the dream ended and the memory began. You opened the door, and now you're the door. He tried to speak, to apologize, to explain. But behind her, every window shattered, and from each broken pane, a person emerged. Some were strangers, some were him, each one whispering, repeating the same phrase in different voices, you are the house. The stair room began to tilt. Gravity screamed sideways. Daniel fell, not down, not up, but in, through walls, through stories, through every step he'd ever taken toward something he couldn't name. And then, silence. He landed in a room he hadn't seen before, an unfinished space, bare beams, damp earth. A single bare bulb swinging slowly. A figure sat in the center, back turned, drawing. Daniel approached. The figure turned. It was the girl, but not the same, older now. Hair longer, skin cracked like porcelain, eyes glowing softly with reflection. I've been waiting, she said. For what? For you to finish. Finish what? The last floor, the deepest one. The place where all the other rooms came from. Daniel looked around. There was no exit, no door, only a shovel leaning against the wall. He walked to it, picked it up. The girl pointed to the dirt beneath her feet. He dug. The ground was soft, wet, warm. He dug until his hands bled. Then something rose from the dirt. Not a box, not a body, a mirror, tall, framed in bone. He looked into it and saw every room he had passed through, every version of himself, every open door, every reflection. The voice returned, whispering from the swing on the porch that hadn't existed until this moment. welcome home. Because the house wasn't a place. It was an echo. And Daniel had finally remembered the sound of his own voice, calling from the other side. The moment Daniel touched the mirror, everything slowed, not like time had stopped, but as if it had grown thick, syrupy, struggling to flow. The swing outside creaked once and fell silent. The bulb above his head pulsed faintly, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor and crawled up the beams like spilled ink chasing light. His reflection in the mirror didn't move, it only stared, not at him, but through him. As if it were watching something else, something behind him. He turned. There was nothing. The girl had vanished. The shovel, too. The bare bulb overhead flickered one final time, then went out, plunging the space into darkness. But the mirror glowed, faintly. It became the only light source in the room, illuminating the floorboards in a cold, silvery hue that made them appear damp even when dry. In the reflection, the room looked different, fuller. The beams were now covered in carvings, names, phrases, drawings, dozens, hundreds. One, written in a hurried scrawl, caught his attention. You are not the first, but you might be the last. The air thickened. Not with smoke, with presence. He stepped backward, but the room resisted him, not with walls or force, but with guilt, with memories that pressed in from the edges. The sound of glass cracking behind his eyes, the smell of old birthday cake, the warmth of blood on his knuckles, his mother's voice saying, "It was just a dream, Daniel. You were only a boy." But that was the lie. The dream hadn't started when he was a boy. It had ended. Everything since then had been the slow unwrapping of a memory too large to hold. And now, here, before this mirror framed in bone and silence, he was facing the threshold he had crossed without knowing it. The reflection moved, not mirrored, independent. Daniel stared, breath frozen. The other him raised one hand, slow and deliberate, and pointed to something over his shoulder. He didn't want to look. Every part of him screamed not to, but he did. And the door was there now, small, crooked, barely taller than his waist. The same door from the attic. The one that had led to the nursery, to the girl, to the baby version of himself. But this time it was slightly ajar. Breathing. The space between the crack and the frame pulsed with warmth. It glowed red, not with fire, with life. And inside he could hear laughter. Children. Dozens. Playing. But beneath the laughter was something else. Wet footsteps. Hushed whispers. The dragging of something heavy. Daniel stepped forward. He didn't want to. He just had to. His hand touched the knob. Cool, trembling beneath his fingers. He opened the door and stepped inside. The hallway was narrow, lined with mirrors on both sides like before. But now each one showed a different person, a different victim. Some he recognized. Marlene, the contractor. Isaac, even the high school kid who'd taken the book. All standing alone in different rooms of the house. Some screaming, some crying, some simply staring. But one thing united all of them. They were all looking into mirrors. At him. He walked slowly, eyes shifting across the glass. The air grew warmer, moister. The laughter ahead grew louder, clearer, but so did the sobbing behind it, the whimpers. The low, deliberate chanting that sounded like children reciting nursery rhymes backward. Then, at the end of the hallway, a door made of mirrors. Every surface reflected him endlessly. A million versions of Daniel, all frozen in different poses. Some frightened, some smiling, one mouth wide in a silent scream. This door had no knob, only a slot, a keyhole shaped like an open eye. He reached into his pocket. The key was still there. He didn't remember putting it back. He didn't remember keeping it. But he knew. He always would have it. He inserted the key. The mirrors blinked. The door opened. And he entered the room that didn't belong in any house. A circle of chairs sat in the middle, all facing outward. In each chair sat a child, knees to chest, staring at the walls. Their eyes were covered with fabric, tied tight, stitched to their skin in places. Their mouths were shut, some sewn, some melted, but all silent. And in the center of the circle was a mirror. The mirror. Tall, polished, pristine. And in it Daniel saw himself, not as he was now, but as he had been before all of this began, as a child, sitting on the floor, holding a drawing of the house. The child looked up, their eyes met, and something snapped. Not in the room, in him. The memory broke through. He remembered the first time he saw the house, not from the road, not in a dream, but in the mirror, in his bedroom. He had drawn it again and again, not knowing why, just compelled by something whispering from the glass. A promise, a game. He looked back at the children in the chairs. They weren't strangers. They were versions of him. Every age. Every path not taken. Every memory buried too deep to claw free. And they had all drawn the house. Because the house wasn't just built by memory. It was memory, rotting, feeding, building itself from the echoes of every person who ever looked too long into a dark window, or whispered their secrets into a reflection, or stepped into a house that wasn't there the day before. Daniel stepped into the circle. The children turned in unison. The bindings fell away. Their eyes were black mirrors, and from each mouth the same word build. He knelt in the center, picked up the drawing, a blank sheet of paper, a crayon in his hand. He began to draw, not because he wanted to, because the house had made room for him, because it needed a new room, because he was the next blueprint. And the house was still hungry, still remembering, still waiting for the next knock. Daniel didn't know how long he had been drawing. Time didn't pass in the center of the circle. It folded, turned in on itself, like pages being flipped backward. The crayon never dulled, and the paper never tore. Each line he drew seemed to summon something, not just from memory, but from somewhere else, somewhere deeper than thought. Each window he sketched opened, each staircase unraveled into a real place he had once stood or would soon stand. He wasn't designing a house. He was restoring it, remembering the rooms that had always been there. The children in the chairs remained still, watching. Their eyes gleamed like oil, no longer mirrors but lenses, absorbing everything he was creating. Every once in a while, one of them would tilt their head, as if listening to something far away, and then their mouths would open in unison, breathless, whispering that same word build. It wasn't a command, it was a fact. The house was inevitable, and Daniel was only its latest shape. When he finally looked up, the room was gone, not in the way things disappear, but in the way shadows fade at dusk, slowly, patiently, with a kind of finality that doesn't require a sound. The circle of chairs had vanished, the children, too. Only the mirror remained, now much larger, its frame embedded into a wall that hadn't been there before. It pulsed faintly, not with light but with breath. He stood, drawing in hand, and stepped toward the glass. His reflection was waiting, not him. Not really. It was a version of him wearing the expression of someone who had accepted a truth far too vast to speak aloud. The version with no panic left, no resistance, only understanding. The reflection raised its hand and gestured behind him. He turned. A door had appeared on the opposite side of the room. It was tall, wooden, ornate. No handle, no keyhole, just carvings etched deep into its surface. They weren't symbols. They were memories. His, carved with impossible precision. The back of his childhood home. The corner of a school hallway he never returned to. The hospital bed. The night he first stood at the edge of the attic stairs and told himself it was nothing. All of it etched into the door like a history that had already decided its ending. The door knew him. It remembered him. And the worst part, he remembered it back. He stepped toward it. Each footfall echoed not in the room, but in his mind, like footsteps walking over old thoughts. He reached out. His fingers hovered inches from the wood, and the door shivered. Then it opened. Inside was the house. Not a hallway, not a stairwell. The whole house, sprawling, endless, breathing. Rooms looped through other rooms. Staircases spiraled into ceilings and dropped into kitchens that dissolved into forests. Mirrors blinked. Doors whimpered. Lights flickered with pulses that matched the rhythm of a heart that hadn't belonged to anything human for a long, long time. Daniel stepped in, and the house exhaled. It knew he was back. It welcomed him. Every room he walked through felt personal, like it had been plucked from a memory he'd forgotten, twisted just slightly, and put back. The den from his uncle's cabin, but with walls made of hair. The grocery store aisle where he'd been lost as a child, only now every product was his face, repeated over and over. His high school classroom, frozen in the moment, just before he realized he was alone, and always had been. But it wasn't torment. Not exactly. It was familiar, like grief wearing the mask of nostalgia. Then he heard it, the creaking, slow, rhythmic, like someone rocking in an old chair. Just out of sight, he followed the sound. Down a hallway with no end. Through a bathroom that was always locked from the inside, though no one had entered it. Across a dining room where the chairs moved if you looked away. The sound grew louder. He pushed open a door, and there she was, the girl, older again, now a woman, sitting in a rocking chair made of bones, gently swaying, eyes shut, humming a tune that didn't belong to any music Daniel knew. Around her feet, the floor was covered in drawings, hundreds of them, maybe more, each one of the house, some drawn by a child's hand, others with the shaky lines of the dying, all variations of the same shape, repeating through time like a scar passed down through blood. She opened her eyes. "You're late," she said. "For what?" "For the lock." She reached into her lap and pulled out a key, not brass. This one was made of teeth. She held it out. He didn't want to take it, but his hand moved anyway. When he touched it, the house shuddered. The lights in every room flickered. The floorboards tensed. Somewhere far away, a door slammed shut and locked from the outside. "You built the shape," she said. "Now you have to keep it." "What do you mean?" "The house needs a keeper." "I never agreed to that." "You did. The first time you looked into the mirror. The first time you imagined a door where there wasn't one. The first time you dreamed of a place that could hold all the things you didn't want to remember." He shook his head. "No. I just wanted to know the truth. I just wanted it to stop." She stood, walked past him, and whispered, "The truth is why it never stops." Then she opened another door and stepped into darkness. Daniel followed. There was nothing, no light, no air, just a slow pulse of heat radiating from beneath the floor. He could feel it now, what the house really was. Not wood and drywall, not haunted, remembered. It was a structure made of grief, memory, fear, and repetition. Each room a wound, each hallway a scar, each door a mouth waiting to open. And now, it had its voice, his. Because Daniel understood something terrible now, something he hadn't wanted to admit, until the final door creaked open and swallowed him. The house was never following him. It was never tricking him. It was never even changing. It was only ever reflecting. And now it had someone who truly remembered how it began. Now it had its keeper, and Daniel. He had finally come home. The walls were made of silence. Thick, suffocating silence that didn't just absorb sound but devoured it. Even Daniel's footsteps refused to echo here. The space he entered was vast and hollow, but the stillness gave it a crushing weight, like walking into a cathedral buried deep beneath the earth. This was no ordinary room. It was the room the house had kept hidden, even from itself. The one place it never wanted anyone to see. The place where forgetting had failed. It wasn't dark, not exactly. A dim, gray light hung in the air, not coming from anywhere in particular, but present all the same. Like the color of dust that settled for decades and doesn't know how to move anymore. The air was heavy, and it smelled of rust and something older. Something Daniel couldn't name, but recognized with the kind of instinct that lives in bone. Like the scent of a basement you've never entered but have always feared. In the center of the room was a table, just a table. Plain, wooden, old. And on it was a single object, a photograph. He didn't want to look at it. Every part of him knew not to. But the house no longer asked permission. It simply waited. Daniel approached. The closer he got, the louder the silence became, humming, groaning, compressing. It crawled up his legs and into his spine, until the only sound he could hear was the tremble of his own pulse, slow and deliberate, like a countdown. He looked at the photo. It was of him, not as he was now, not even as a child. It was him as a baby, being held in the arms of a woman whose face had been violently scratched out. Not erased, attacked. Long claw marks across the photograph's surface. The paper torn, the ink smeared. But the baby's eyes stared out too wide, too aware. The edges of the photo began to curl. Then the image moved. The arms holding him twitched. The background pulsed with shadow. The scratch marks began to heal, reversing themselves as if the damage had never occurred. The woman's face returned. Daniel dropped the photo. It fluttered down like a falling leaf. Her face was his, not a mother, not a sister, not a stranger. It was him, older, much older, aged past recognition. The house had been raising itself through him, feeding off every stage of his life. Every version of him echoing through its rooms, each becoming another brick, another mirror, another locked door. And this room, the one of stillness and rot, was the final piece, the place where the house kept its memory of becoming. A sound broke the silence, soft. A lullaby, sung from somewhere in the farthest corner of the room. He turned, heart in his throat, and saw the chair. A rocking chair, familiar in shape but wrong in texture. It looked grown, not built, like it had sprouted from the floor. The lullaby continued, breathy, brittle. The voice cracked with each word, not from age but from being unused for too long. In the chair sat a woman, her back to him. Long, tangled hair spilled down her shoulders. She rocked gently, hands in her lap. The lullaby faded. Daniel stepped closer. He didn't want to, but the room tightened behind him. There was no turning back. The woman in the chair stopped rocking. "I told you not to come here," she whispered. Her voice echoed with hundreds of others layered beneath it. Men, women, children, all saying the same thing in unison. He didn't respond. She turned her head slowly. Her face was stitched shut. Eyes sewn, lips sealed, ears wired closed. But he could feel her looking at him. "You were supposed to forget," she said without moving her mouth. Daniel trembled. What is this place? The part you left behind." She stood. Her body creaked, not like joints, but like timber bending under pressure. "You fed it," she said. "You fed the house your fear, your questions, your grief, and now it is full. But it still remembers when it was empty, and it needs someone to hold that memory." She held out her hand. In it was a key. Not brass, not teeth. This one was bone, pale, smooth, warm. It throbbed in her hand like a heartbeat. He reached for it. Their fingers touched, and something poured into him. Not knowledge, not power. A weight, the weight of all the others who had held the key before him. He saw flashes, hundreds of lives, moments, deaths, all different, all the same, each one drawn to the house, each one slowly becoming part of it, until only the key remained, and the memory. "You understand now," she said. Yes, he did. The house was not just made of rooms. It was made of roles: caretaker, dreamer, architect, witness, gatekeeper, and now, keeper of the forgotten. That was what this room was. The last stop for memory too dangerous to keep and too heavy to destroy. He turned to look back. The door had vanished. The woman was gone. But the chair remained, empty now, waiting. He sat, and the house sighed. It pressed against him, folded around him, welcomed him into its roots. Because every house has a basement. Every story has a cellar where the truths are buried. And every mirror needs someone behind it. The rocking began again, and Daniel, keeper of the room that waited to be forgotten, closed his eyes. The chair didn't creak as he rocked. It breathed. With every backward sway, it exhaled something soft and warm. With every forward shift, it inhaled sharply, like drawing in fog. Daniel sat motionless, staring into the nothing that stretched before him, a gray fog pressing gently against the shape of the room, muffling all movement, swallowing even his thoughts. The bone key lay across his lap now, weightless but impossible to ignore. Like a nail embedded just beneath the skin, he hadn't spoken since he sat down. Not because he didn't want to, but because the house had finally gone quiet. At least, that's what he believed. Until the floor shifted. Not a tremor, not a quake. A slow, deliberate movement, like something vast and unseen had rolled beneath the surface. The chair stopped rocking on its own. The fog began to thin, drawn away in long, stringy tendrils toward a point far ahead of him, toward something opening. He rose from the chair. The key pulsed. Ahead, a square outline took form in the floorboards, separating itself like skin revealing a scar. It wasn't a trapdoor. It was a mouth. The boards peeled back in segments, folding down to reveal a dark staircase that descended not into shadow, but into complete absence. No light, no sound, no temperature. Only a presence that waited with ancient patience just below the floor. Daniel took the key. He stepped down. One stair, then another. The air tightened with each step, not from pressure, but from consequence. He wasn't just going beneath the house. He was descending into the reason it existed. No walls, no beams. Just the idea of descent. The illusion of gravity in a place that had no right to it. After a time that could have been minutes or hours, his feet met level ground. He had arrived, and the house of the house had prepared this place for him. The basement was vast, circular, walled in pulsing material that resembled stone, but moved like flesh beneath water. The ceiling was too far to see, but something dripped from it. Slowly, rhythmically. Each drop landed soundlessly in the pitch, black pool at the center of the chamber. There were no mirrors here. Only one thing stood in the room, a door, not wooden, not glass. This one was made of void, an absence shaped into a rectangle, tall enough to swallow a cathedral. No knob, no frame. Just an outline that vibrated slightly with the weight of whatever waited on the other side. The key in Daniel's hand grew colder. He stepped toward it. The pool rippled as he passed. He didn't look into it. Not yet. But he felt it watching. He approached the void door, and the house spoke again, not with voice, with remembrance. It showed him images, dozens, then hundreds, all at once. The woman in the rocking chair, her stitches bleeding. The children in the circle, whispering without mouths. The drawings, the mirror, the attic. The door with no knob. The moment he first stood outside the house and felt that something on the other side of the window had already seen him. And then, beneath it all, a memory he had never lived. A little boy, barefoot, walking through an empty, bleeding version of this very house. His eyes hollow, his hands holding a drawing. Of Daniel. The house had not simply remembered him. It had dreamed him. He had been its answer all along. The final piece of its puzzle. The one who would open the void door. Because only someone who had never truly existed could reach the place where everything had once begun. Daniel pressed the key into the space where the knob should have been. It slid in like light sinking into water. There was no click, no confirmation. The door simply opened. And on the other side, a field, flat, infinite, stretching out beneath a sky that pulsed like a dying eye. No sun, no stars, only that pale gaze, watching, blinking slowly, endlessly. The field was covered in doors, thousands of them, all shapes, all sizes, some wooden, some glass, some built from objects he couldn't name, and walking between them were people, all moving slowly, aimlessly, faces blurred, voices slurred into static, each one searching for a door they could no longer find. He stepped into the field. The door behind him vanished. No sound. Just gone. He was in the place beneath the house. The true foundation. Not brick or bone, but memory too broken to forget and too dangerous to recall. And then he heard them, footsteps behind him. He turned. A line of figures was following him into the field, one by one. All versions of himself, aged, young, dead-eyed, screaming. smiling, each one holding a key, each one searching for the door that would explain why they'd been built at all. Daniel walked forward. The doors shifted as he passed. One opened on its own. Inside was the house again, but not as he had left it. This version was unfinished, still growing, still swallowing. It would never be complete. Not until everyone who had ever dreamed it was finally inside. He stepped through and became part of its frame, a new beam, a new stare, a new memory, a new mouth, waiting for the next knock. It didn't begin with a scream. It began with a breath, a soft inhale drawn through the boards of the house like wind slipping beneath a coffin lid. Daniel wasn't entirely aware of where he was anymore, only that he wasn't alone, and that he never had been. The house, rebuilt and rebuilt again through layers of memory and rot, now lived inside him as much as he lived inside it. But something felt different now, off balance, like a thread had come undone. It was no longer simply echoing what he feared. It was reacting to something it hadn't planned for. He opened his eyes. He was standing in the nursery again. The same mobile spun slowly overhead, though no air stirred it. The same stuffed bear sat on the shelf, worn and torn at the seams. The crib was still empty, but this time, the walls were different. Instead of soft pastel paint, they were covered with names. Thousands of names, scrawled in chalk, in ash, in blood. Some were written over and over, desperate and shaky. Others were burned in perfectly straight lines, branded deep into the plaster. One name appeared more than any other: Daniel. He backed away, heart racing. The names began to shimmer. Then, without warning, the room blinked. Not the lights, the space itself. It vanished, replaced by a new room, one he hadn't seen in years. His childhood bedroom, intact, untouched, but corrupted. The colors were wrong. His posters had no faces. His toys were melted versions of themselves, and the bed was breathing. He heard a voice behind him. "She tried to take you out," it said, barely more than a rasp. Daniel spun around. There was no one there. Only the mirror on the far wall, the one that had always felt off, even as a child. The mirror rippled. Then it showed her, the woman in the rocking chair. Younger now, her stitches undone, her mouth open. "She buried the drawing," she said. "You weren't supposed to remember." Daniel stumbled back. "What are you talking about?" "She burned the first one, the real one. But houses don't forget. They rebuild, especially when you give them the right shape." The mirror shattered, not violently, but like it had completed its purpose. Daniel turned toward the door, but the room shifted again. He was in a hallway now. Long, narrow, infinite. On either side were doors, hundreds, all identical, and behind each one he could hear a version of himself, crying, laughing, screaming, talking to people who were no longer alive. Each door was a moment he had locked away. Each was his. He chose one. A pale blue door, chipped and slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Inside, his father sat at a table, reading the newspaper, whole, alive. The scent of coffee filled the room. Daniel stepped in, but his feet didn't touch the floor. The room refused to register him. He watched as his younger self entered, 10 years old, holding a drawing. The house. His father looked up, smiled, and said, "You should stop drawing that, Danny. It's not real." Young Daniel nodded, but didn't stop, because something in the lines of that house pulled at him, even then, especially then. The room faded. He was back in the hallway. The doors began to slam shut one by one, faster and faster, until only one remained open. At the very end, a black door, carved with the word K-R. He stepped through, and entered the foundation of the foundation. No floors, no ceiling, just a vast, open dark lit by a single spotlight in the distance. He walked toward it. In the center of the light was a desk. At the desk, a man sat writing. Daniel approached slowly, breath held. The man looked up. It was him, older, worn, eyes hollowed by years spent watching the walls remember themselves. "You came back," the man said. "I had to, I know." "What is this place?" The man gestured to the vast dark. "This is where it writes itself." This is where it makes the story again. Every time someone forgets, it starts here. New rooms, new names, same rules. Daniel sat across from him. The man slid a page forward, a blueprint of the house, still changing, still growing. You can stop it, Daniel said. The man smiled, a broken thing. No, I can only record it. Silence. Then the man stood, placed the pen on the desk, and stepped into the darkness. He dissolved. Daniel was alone again. The blueprint stared up at him, and for the first time, he saw the center. The true center. A room with no doors, no windows, only walls. And in the heart of it, one word. You. He folded the paper, placed it in his pocket, and walked away from the desk. The house groaned above him. It felt hungry, but also confused, as if something inside it was misaligned. Daniel paused, realization creeping in. He hadn't just remembered the house. He had changed it. The memory that was never supposed to survive. The drawing his mother had burned. He'd redrawn it. And that made the house unstable. If he could change the memory, he could destroy the foundation. Not by force, by forgetting. Truly forgetting. But not just himself. Everyone. Everything. The house needed memory to exist. Without memory, it was only wood and air. Daniel stood at the edge of the dark and whispered a name he hadn't said in decades. The name of the one who had built it before him. The real architect. The one who never escaped. The one the house buried. Her voice answered in the silence. I never wanted it to remember me either. And with that, the walls cracked. The doors screamed. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the house, the first mirror shattered. It began with a sound no ear could hear, and no body could endure. The snapping of something ancient and intimate, like a ligament tearing beneath the surface of a memory. Daniel felt it before he understood it. The weight of the house shifted, not physically, not the way a structure sways during a quake or groans during a storm. This was deeper, the kind of movement that makes rooms go cold and light bulbs flicker, not because of ghosts, but because reality itself just looked away for a second. Something had fractured. Something that had always held. He was still standing at the edge of the void, the blueprint of the house burning faintly in his pocket. The air smelled different now, sharper, brittle. Not smoke, not rot. Time. It was unraveling, peeling itself off the walls like old paint. The house was confused, agitated, like an animal woken from a dream that wasn't supposed to end. He walked. The floor beneath him reassembled with each step, forming and deforming. Bedrooms, corridors, closets, stairwells. Each was incomplete. Not just abandoned mid-construction, but forgotten halfway through being imagined. Doorknobs melted into walls. Staircases ended in ceilings. Windows looked into other windows that looked into other people's nightmares. It wasn't the house anymore. It was its splinters, and in each broken room, a figure. Still, watching. Some were seated, some hanging from invisible threads, others curled in corners, murmuring to themselves in voices too soft to be their own. Daniel knew what they were. Remnants. The leftovers of everyone who'd ever almost escaped. Pieces that had refused to fade. They weren't alive. Not anymore. But they weren't gone either. Each one carried just enough fear to stay anchored. Just enough memory to feed the house. He kept walking. The house was trying to rebuild itself around him, but it wasn't succeeding. It couldn't decide what he was anymore. Victim, architect, intruder, key. He'd blurred too many lines, touched too many locked places. His existence no longer made sense inside the house's rules, and that made him dangerous. It lashed out. The walls pulsed, groaned, tried to spit him out or swallow him whole. The temperature surged. The doors howled. The mirrors blinked on and off like panicked eyes. At one point, the ceiling collapsed into a sea of outstretched hands, each one clutching a fragment of the same, drawing a child's sketch of the house. Red crayon bleeding through the paper. They rained down on him. Dozens, hundreds. The same shape over and over. And beneath the paperfall, a voice. Not the house this time. A child's voice. Finish it. He turned. No one there. Just a door ahead, tall, white, clean, untouched by the rot. His name etched into the surface, Daniel. Not carved, not written. Grown, like the wood knew him. He didn't touch it. He simply stood before it and asked, "What happens if I open you?" The door answered with silence. Not absence, but expectation. He opened it. The room inside was blinding. Not from light, but from clarity. It was his room. The real one. The one before the house. Before the mirror. Before the first drawing. A clean bed. A worn stuffed animal at the edge. Books stacked in clumsy piles. The walls plain, painted blue. Everything untouched by the nightmare. But in the center, a mirror. Just like always. Daniel walked toward it. He was afraid to look. But he did. And the reflection was not his own. It was the house, shifting, bleeding into itself, dying, its edges fraying, its core collapsing. Because somewhere in the basement of the basement, beneath all the memory and fear and borrowed flesh, it had lost the first thing it needed to survive: belief. He reached out and touched the mirror. It cracked. The cracks spread outward, across the glass, the walls, the sky, through every level of the house, like fault lines erupting after centuries of pressure. Every room began to shake, from the attic down to the doorless halls. The children's circle collapsed, the rocking chair split, the nursery caved. Even the door made a void shivered and bled light from its edges. And somewhere deep in the house, the very first drawing burst into flame. Daniel dropped to his knees. The world shifted again. He was standing on the lawn, the house behind him, whole, silent, waiting, but different. He turned to it. No windows, no doors, no mirrors, just four walls, empty, a shell, a monument to forgetting. The wind passed, no voices rode it, no breathing echoed behind the wood. And for the first time, Daniel understood the house had never been alive. He had. The house only reflected what he gave it. What everyone gave it. Fear, guilt, memory, and now. He had given it nothing, no story, no role, no shape, only silence, only an end. He stepped off the lawn, walked away. No pull behind him. No whisper of return. Just the hollow space of a nightmare finally starved of its dreamer. And in the distance, behind the horizon where the sky forgot to remember, the house watched itself crumble. Daniel didn't look back. Not once. He walked until the air changed, until the pressure that had gripped his spine, like a puppeteer's string, loosened and dissolved. The house didn't chase him. It didn't scream, didn't crack apart in some cinematic collapse. It simply receded, quietly, like a nightmare shrinking in the morning light, and yet he felt it still. A presence, not behind him, but beneath him. A hush in the ground. A chill in the space between heartbeats. The house wasn't gone. It had just forgotten itself. The sky above him no longer flickered like a broken reel. It was gray, overcast, unmoving. There was no sun. No wind. The world felt paused, thin, as though he'd stepped into a moment stretched too far. He walked along a path that hadn't existed before. A narrow dirt trail winding through dead fields, stalks of blackened grass brushing his ankles. No birds, no insects, just the sound of his own steps, muffled, detached, like walking in a dream already fading. Then he saw them, figures, far off, still, facing him. They stood shoulder to shoulder along the horizon, unmoving. At first he thought they were trees, but as he came closer, he saw their eyes. Every one of them wide open, every one of them black. Empty, not like voids, but like holes cut through time. Their bodies were translucent, wavering, as if not fully committed to existing here. He recognized their faces. All of them. People the house had taken. Marlene, Isaac, the boy with the bleeding eyes, the girl from the window, and dozens of others. People he'd never met but somehow remembered, because the house had fed on their memories too, and now he carried pieces of them inside him. They didn't move. Didn't speak, until he crossed a line he couldn't see. Then they whispered, one word, soft unison. Not threatening, not pleading, just tired. Why? Daniel froze. The figures blinked in and out like faulty signals. The question wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't meant to haunt him. It was genuine. From the remnants, the echoes. Why did he survive? Why him? Why now? He didn't answer. What could he say? That he broke the cycle by accident. That he touched the wrong mirror, asked the right question, remembered too much. They watched him for another moment, then turned as one and walked away. Not into the distance, into the air. They dissolved like steam, and Daniel was alone again. The path continued, but something shifted. Up ahead, the ground dipped, a gentle slope leading into a shallow basin. At the center of it stood something impossible. A door, freestanding, no frame, no hinges, just a door white, familiar. He walked toward it, heart pulsing in rhythm with something he couldn't name. There were no markings on the door, no handle, yet it radiated warmth, soft, human warmth. The kind that belonged to blankets and kitchen lights and voices calling from the other room. He stood before it, and for the first time since stepping into the house, Daniel felt something foreign and fragile bloom in his chest. Hope. It scared him. He reached out, fingers brushing the surface. It was warm, real. He pressed his palm flat against it. No resistance. The door swung open, and on the other side, home. Not the house, his home. The real one, his apartment. Small, cluttered, normal. Sunlight slanting through cheap blinds, dust floating in the air. The hum of the refrigerator, his coffee mug still sitting in the sink. Everything as he left it, everything right. He stepped through, fell to his knees. Let the silence hold him. He was back. He was home. But something inside him knew it wasn't over. You don't unlive a nightmare like that. You carry it. The same way you carry old grief. Not always visible, but always there. He stood slowly, approached the mirror by the door. His reflection looked tired, but it was his. No flickering, no shadow mimicking him, no whispers crawling behind the glass. He turned away, and that's when he saw it, the drawing. Still on the coffee table, the one he had made as a child. Crayons, rough lines. The house, still there, still whole, still waiting. He picked it up. It was warm. He turned it over. And written on the back, in handwriting not his own, you came back. We remember you now. The lights flickered, just once, but enough. He stood still, not afraid, not this time, because he finally understood the house had forgotten itself. But it would remember again, someday. And when it did, it would knock. The knock didn't come right away. It waited. Patient, like it always had. Daniel went about the next day trying not to think about the house, the door, the endless rooms that had once breathed around him. He told himself that it was done, that walking through the door into his own world, into reality, had sealed something shut. But every now and then, he would hear something. Not loud, not threatening. A soft, barely, their shuffle across the hardwood floor. A tap, a breath from the wrong side of the mirror. He told himself it was nothing. The kind of nothing that made people close closet doors a little faster. Check under their beds even when they knew nothing was there. But that kind of nothing doesn't leave drawings. It started with one, left on his desk overnight, the same rough red crayon lines, shaky but familiar. The house again. But different this time. The proportions were warped, exaggerated, windows too tall, doors too wide, the roof bent at an impossible angle like the house had been stretched mid-screen. Daniel stared at it for a long time. He didn't remember drawing it. But the paper smelled like him, felt like him. As if it had come from inside rather than been placed there. He didn't sleep that night. He tried. But sleep now felt like an invitation, like surrender. And something in his bones told him that the house was still waiting on the other side of sleep. Patient, silent, holding its breath. The next morning, another drawing. This one was of the nursery. The crib wasn't empty anymore. There was something curled in it. Not a baby. Not human. Just a shape. A suggestion of a face, blurred at the edges like a memory trying to crawl back into form. And above the crib, scribbled in a crooked child's scrawl, you left it behind. He dropped the paper and walked out into the cold, trying to clear his head, pretending he didn't hear the front door close itself behind him. When he returned, everything in his apartment had been rearranged. Not messily, carefully, lovingly, as if someone, or something, had tried to make it more familiar to him. A version of home pieced together from stolen fragments. The couch turned at an angle just like it had been in his childhood home. The mug, now full of cold coffee, sitting in the exact same place his father used to leave his. Daniel sat down. He waited, and at 3:07 a.m. it came, the knock, soft, once. From the inside of the closet, he didn't move, didn't speak. The silence afterward was worse, because it wasn't just silence, it was listening. He heard it breathe. He stood, crossed the room, opened the closet door. It was empty, except for a mirror. He hadn't put it there. It was old. The frame splintered, the surface warped, but still, unmistakably, the same one that had stood in the attic. He covered it with a sheet, walked away. But the next morning, the mirror had moved. Now it sat in the hallway, leaning against the wall like it had always belonged there. He didn't touch it. He didn't look into it. But that night, he woke up to find himself sitting in front of it. Not sleepwalking, just there, staring. And the mirror wasn't empty. It showed a door, not in his apartment, not in any real place, but a door he knew. The white one, the one with his name. The one he thought he'd left behind. It was open, and something was standing on the other side. He couldn't see it fully, just the edge of a shadow, trembling slightly, like it wasn't ready yet, like it was still shaping itself into something he'd recognize, something he'd accept. The next morning, the drawing was different. It wasn't the house anymore. It was him, sitting in front of the mirror, eyes wide, smile wrong. The lines were so deep they'd torn the paper in places, crayon mashed down until it was almost black. At the bottom, written in the same broken scrawl, it remembers now. Daniel stopped going outside. The world felt thinner every day. His clocks stopped working. His reflection blinked out of sync. And in every silence, he could hear the echo of a hallway that didn't exist, the swing of a door that had no room behind it. He told himself not to open the mirror, not to answer the knock, but he knew better. This was never about escape. It was always about recognition. The house hadn't followed him back. It had always been part of him, waiting for him to remember the shape, to finish what he started when he drew that first line. And now, the mirror was a door again, open, still breathing, and the thing inside it, it didn't knock anymore. It was waiting for permission. Daniel stopped pretending he had a choice. For days, maybe weeks, time no longer held shape. He had fought the subtle gravity of the mirror, trying to live around it, ignore it, pretend the growing hum beneath his floorboards was just pipes, the soft knocks against his windows, just branches, the shifting shadows on the walls just tricks of his eyes. But denial has a shelf life, and his had expired, because the mirror no longer waited for him to look. It watched on its own. Every morning now, it had moved, slightly, angled a few degrees closer to the bed, to the bathroom, to wherever he tried to hide. And each night, he would wake up not just staring into it, but seeing himself blink too late, smile too long. The reflection wasn't malicious, not angry, just persistent, as if waiting for him to catch up with something it had already accepted. And there was the voice. It didn't speak with words. It used his own memories, curling them in his mind when he was weakest. The lullaby his mother sang when he was feverish at 4. The click of the attic light turning on even when the switch hadn't been touched. The rhythmic creak of that rocking chair, the one that no longer existed but still moved in the corner of his eye. Then, one morning, the mirror changed. It was no longer a reflection. It was a corridor. A hallway made of smooth, wet stone that pulsed slightly, like a throat preparing to swallow. The walls shimmered with a faint glow, just enough to reveal dozens of doors. Some cracked open, some sealed. all humming softly, and standing at the end of the hallway, back to him, was a child, his younger self, 7 years old, barefoot, clutching that first drawing in one hand. The child turned his head just slightly, enough to show one eye, wide and dark. "You stopped drawing," the boy whispered. Daniel didn't remember moving toward the mirror. His body simply did what it needed to. The air near the glass was colder now, thick with that same quiet tension he'd felt when standing just outside the house for the first time. The moment before crossing a line. But the line was gone now. There was no threshold anymore, just invitation, and the sound, so soft it was almost kindness, of the mirror whispering his name. Daniel. Again. Daniel, it came from behind the glass, behind the hallway, from somewhere deep in the unseen place that every mirror leads to if you look long enough without blinking. He reached out. The glass didn't break, didn't ripple, it breathed, and then it opened. The sensation wasn't falling, it was folding, like the room collapsed inward and pressed him through something thinner than paper. And then he was standing, whole, awake, aware. Inside the hallway. It smelled like wet dust and burned matches. The doors on either side pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. Some had names carved into them. Some had symbols. Others just wept. He passed them slowly. Behind one door, he heard his mother arguing with someone who sounded like him, only older. More afraid. Behind another, he heard the sound of dirt being shoveled onto wood. Behind a third, the screaming never stopped. But the boy kept walking, always ahead, always just out of reach. Daniel called after him. "Wait," the boy paused, did not turn, but raised the drawing and placed it on a door. This door was different. It looked like it had been drawn, not built, red crayon lines shimmering in midair, vibrating as though on the verge of disappearing. When Daniel reached it, the boy was gone. Only the drawing remained. He looked at it, and knew what it was. It was the door from the beginning, the first one, the attic door, the one he never opened but always feared. He touched the drawing, the world shivered, and the door opened. Inside was the attic, silent, covered in dust thick enough to choke, and in the center, the chair, the one made of bone and breath. Sitting in it was him, older again, ancient even, his skin pale and paper, thin, eyes sunken. A long coil of drawings spilling across the floor. This version of him looked up, smiled. "You're here to end it," he said. Daniel stepped forward, trembling. "Am I?" The old man laughed. "No. You're here to begin it again." He pointed to the drawings. They were all versions of the house. Some more detailed, some grotesque, some strangely serene, but every one of them his. The house had been drawn by him in every life, every loop. He wasn't its victim. He was its author. "You've built it so many times," the old version whispered. "Now you have a chance to forget." Daniel knelt by the pile. His hands trembled. He picked one drawing up. It showed a door inside a mirror. Another showed a child standing before a staircase that curled into the sky. The last one was blank. He looked at the old man. "What do I do?" "You decide," the man said. "Draw again or burn it." Daniel held the blank page. The attic pulsed. The mirror on the far wall began to glow. He approached it. Blank paper in one hand, match in the other. And then he heard it. The knock. Not on the mirror. Not on the walls. From inside his head. It was his own hand. Rapping 3 times. A memory so old it had never existed. And with that knock, everything made sense. He had never escaped. He had only turned the house inside out. It was no longer a place he entered. It was a place that had grown within him. He looked into the mirror. His reflection was smiling. It held a crayon and was already drawing. The page in his own hand began to fill itself, line by line. The attic again. The chair. The door. Him. Over and over. Daniel opened his mouth to scream. But the house had no need for noise anymore. It had a new page. And it was writing itself. The crayon moved across the page without his hand. Red lines bloomed, wreathing into form. Shaping windows where there had been none, drawing doors that hadn't existed seconds ago. Daniel stared down at the blank sheet as it transformed into a perfect replica of the attic. His attic, and not. The attic that breathed. The one with the mirror that reflected futures. The chair that rocked when it shouldn't. The silence that wasn't absence, but anticipation. His reflection inside the mirror grinned wider now, too wide, too hungry. It didn't blink when he did. It didn't move when he shifted. It stayed perfectly still, like it was waiting for him to become still too. Something inside Daniel cracked, but it wasn't panic. Panic had passed. It had dissolved somewhere back in the hallway of doors. This was something colder, quieter. The thudding calm that comes when you understand you were never walking toward something. You were always already inside it. The house hadn't grown within him like a parasite. He had carved himself into its walls, layer by layer, each time he remembered a little more. Each time he refused to let go, he turned from the mirror. The chair sat still, empty, but the air around it pulsed like lungs breathing beneath the floor. He didn't want to sit. He had sat. Already. Would again. Time was nothing here. The attic was no longer a room at the top of the house. It was the center, the brain, and it was thinking faster now. Behind him, the door groaned open. The hallway, back again. But the doors were gone now. Only one stood at the end, tall, dark. Its surface shimmered like wet ink. The same door he had seen drawn again and again in his childhood sketches, in nightmares he thought were dreams. A door he had always feared but never remembered walking through. Until now. The hallway narrowed as he walked. The walls drew closer, whispering softly. Not words, just intention. As if the house was leaning in, watching its author return to the final chapter. The air was thick, each breath tasting of paper and mold, the scent of memories that had never been allowed to rot. When he reached the door, he hesitated. Not because he was afraid, but because he remembered everything. The first time he had drawn it, not knowing what it meant. The first time he'd opened it, long before he knew how to forget. The first time he saw what waited on the other side. He opened it, and the world screamed. It wasn't a scream he heard with his ears. It was a memory scream, one that lived in the marrow of his bones, echoed through generations of thoughts that weren't his, but had always lived inside the attic walls. The space beyond the door wasn't a room. It was a void shaped like a cathedral of unmade ideas. The house wasn't just made of wood and breath anymore. It was built from versions, failed Daniels, forgotten Daniels. Echoes, they lined the walls. Some crouched in corners, whispering to themselves. Some scribbled endlessly on the floor, paper bleeding red. Some stood still, head tilted back, staring at nothing, forever. Each one had a piece of the house inside them. And Daniel was the only one who'd seen all of it. At the center of the cathedral sat a table, and on it, another drawing. He walked slowly. Each step made the floor peel back and re-form behind him. The drawing on the table was unfinished, just outlines. A house with no roof, no windows, just an empty box with a single door, no mirrors, no attic, no chair, just one room. And in that room, a boy, Daniel. Alone, he picked up the crayon that lay beside it. His reflection appeared beside him. Not in glass, not in shadow, but as a second presence. Same face, same breath, same weight. But its eyes were darker, older, tired. "You'll draw it again," the reflection said. "You always do." Daniel didn't speak. He looked at the drawing, then at the crayon, then at his other self. "No," he said, "I won't." And for the first time, he didn't pick up the crayon. He picked up the drawing instead, and tore it in half. The moment the paper split, the floor buckled. The walls collapsed inward. The echo versions shrieked and blinked out one by one, each vanishing like a match dropped in water. The reflection howled, not in rage, but in loss. The house twisted, began to unravel, from attic to foundation, mirror to memory. The cathedral crumbled into smoke. Daniel stood alone, surrounded by nothing. No doors, no drawings, no mirrors, just the soft ache of silence. Then, footsteps, slow, measured. He turned. A child stood there, not him. A girl, holding a drawing. Her hands trembled. She looked up, and Daniel saw the house again, etched in crayon on the paper. The cycle trying to begin again. She held the paper out to him. He didn't take it. He knelt, looked her in the eye. "You don't have to draw it," he whispered. "But I dreamed it," she said. "I know," he said. "But dreams aren't homes. They're doors." She stared at him, then at the drawing. Her fingers tightened, then loosened. She let it go. The paper drifted to the floor, turned to ash before it landed, and with it the last memory of the house burned away. Daniel stood, took the girl's hand. Together, they walked into the light that had no source. And somewhere far behind them, where shadows had once remembered how to breathe, the house forgot. Forever. They say silence is just the absence of sound. But this silence wasn't empty. It was thick. It clung to Daniel's skin like smoke from a fire that refused to go out completely, like it had one last breath to exhale before it finally let go. The girl's hand in his own was warm, real small, yet her grip had weight. The kind of unseen heaviness you don't question until it starts pulling you backward. They walked together into the white, a colorless place that wasn't sky or fog or light, but everything stripped of memory. Daniel didn't speak. Neither did she. There were no words left, and none were needed, not yet, because even though the house was gone, even though its last walls had collapsed into dust, there was still a faint hum beneath their feet. Not sound, not motion, just persistence. Like something trying not to be forgotten. Like something that refused to stop whispering, even after its tongue had burned away. The light faded gradually, not into darkness, but into shape. Land, grass, trees, reality, or a version of it. They emerged at the edge of a field. The grass swayed gently, though no wind moved it. The sky overhead was pale, not gray or blue, just neutral. As if it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. A crooked wooden sign stood nearby, half rotted and leaning slightly. There were no words on it, just a scribbled red circle, drawn crudely, deeply. It looked familiar. The girl stopped. Daniel turned to her. She wasn't looking at the sign. She was staring at the horizon. There, at the very end of the field, stood a shape. It wasn't a house. Not yet. Just beams and bones. A frame, unfinished, waiting. Daniel's heart thudded once, hard. He took a step forward. The girl didn't follow. He turned back. She was gone. No sound. No footfall. Just vanished, like she had never truly been there. Only the crumpled remains of the drawing remained at his feet, singed at the corners but still intact. The lines weren't his. They were hers. The house again, drawn in a child's hand, only this time the attic was missing. The windows were all bricked up, and where the door should have been, there was only a single word, "Namureit." He stared at it, fingers tightening around the edge of the page. From behind him, a breeze finally stirred, but it carried no wind, just a voice. Not the house, not the mirror, his own. "You thought burning the memory would kill it," it whispered. "But memories don't burn. They seed." The house hadn't died. It had scattered. Each piece embedded in the mind of someone who glimpsed its shape. Someone who walked past it once and couldn't quite remember why they crossed the street, why the back of their neck tingled when they looked at a window that reflected nothing. Daniel stood still. The frame ahead of him was simple, just wood. No foundation yet, no door, but the feeling, the presence, it was returning. He walked forward. The earth beneath him began to shift, just barely, as if something deep below was turning over in its sleep. The air thickened, tasting faintly of dust and old breath. When he reached the frame, he could feel it breathing. It was still incomplete, still unsure of its identity, still waiting to be drawn. And suddenly, he knew why the girl had disappeared. Because it wasn't him the house needed anymore. It was anyone. Anyone to sketch it, imagine it, remember the wrong turn down a hallway that shouldn't exist. The story didn't need its author, just an echo of its shape. He looked at the drawing again. The word on the door, WIT, seemed to ripple, like it was changing. He blinked. It no longer said Wait. Now it said DITCH. That's when he heard the sound. Not the knock. A scratch. From below. From the soil. A soft, slow scraping. Like fingernails dragging upward. Like something beneath the roots was waking up. Daniel backed away from the frame. But something inside him pulled forward. A warmth in his pocket. He reached in and pulled out a crayon. Red. He hadn't remembered keeping it. Hadn't remembered putting it in his coat. But it was there. Heavy. Real. The same one he'd used over and over to draw the house into being. He dropped it. The moment it hit the grass, the frame groaned. Beams tightened. The outline of a door formed, not drawn but remembered. A creak echoed across the empty land. Somewhere a light flickered behind glass that hadn't been installed yet. Daniel turned and ran, but the field didn't end. It stretched endlessly now, looping back into itself. And in the distance, the frame stood taller, growing, rebuilding. Not because it was haunted, not because it was evil, but because it was unfinished. Because someone, somewhere, still remembered the attic, still feared the mirror, still felt the knock in their bones. The house would never stop. It would only start again, with new hands, new drawings, new rooms. Daniel stumbled, fell. When he looked up, he saw the girl again. Standing beside the frame, smiling softly, she picked up the crayon and pressed it to the door. And behind her, the attic sighed. It was not just a drawing anymore. When the girl's small hand pressed the red crayon against the unfinished wood, the line it left didn't look like wax. It looked wet, fresh, like someone had sliced into the beams themselves and exposed a vein. The frame of the house shuddered gently beneath her fingers, welcoming the contact like a forgotten pet crawling back to its master. Daniel, still collapsed in the tall grass, watched with wide, unwilling eyes. He should have been too far to see the line so clearly, but the moment it touched the wood, he felt it burn across his own palm. A red smear. A twin wound. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling back from the sight, but the field betrayed him. Each time he stepped away, the grass pushed him forward again, subtly, firmly, until the only direction he could go was toward the growing house. And it was growing now. Planks layering atop each other, not built but remembered, called from somewhere beneath the earth, assembled by unseen hands. No nails, no tools, just memory made physical, memory shaped by fear, stitched with guilt, bound in silence. The girl wasn't speaking. She wasn't even looking at the house as she drew the frame of the door in thick, looping red lines. Her expression was vacant, trance-like, her eyes reflecting something Daniel couldn't see. He wanted to shout, to stop her, but his voice failed him. Not from fear. He had burned through that, but from inevitability. There was a weight in the air, a density he'd only felt in dreams. When you realize too late that you're still asleep, that the monster's breath is on your neck and waking up won't help anymore. Then came the sound. Not a knock. Not the scraping he'd heard before. This time it was a lullaby, hummed through the walls of a house that barely had walls. The tune twisted his stomach with instant recognition. His mother's voice. The same broken melody she'd hummed when she thought he was asleep, sitting outside his room after his father's funeral. A tune without words, a grief song. The girl began to sing it, perfectly. Her voice was not her own. It cracked in the middle, like an old recording playing too long on a broken machine. Daniel's legs gave out. He collapsed again, this time not from panic, but exhaustion. Soul-deep fatigue. The feeling of being outlived by your own nightmares. The doorway was fully drawn now, a perfect red rectangle, and with it, the beams of the house locked together. The frame had walls now, a roof, windows. No glass yet, but they pulsed faintly, like lungs waiting to take their first breath. The door at the front stood ajar. Behind it, only blackness. Not shadow, not void, but unspoken space, awaiting. The girl stepped back from her drawing, hands slack at her sides, the crayon still clutched like a relic. Then, and only then, she turned to Daniel. He saw her eyes, and he knew. She wasn't a girl, not anymore. Maybe not ever. She was the echo of every child who had stepped too close to the mirror, who had followed a voice down a hallway that shouldn't have existed. She was made of scribbles and soot and things that never made it into bedtime stories. And now she was the beginning. He forced himself to his feet, dragging breath into his lungs. "You don't have to do this," he whispered, voice raw. Her head tilted slightly, like a doll hearing a familiar voice through fog. "I already did," she said, and she pointed to the house. It was fully built now, as if it had always been there, and yet still becoming. Daniel stepped closer. Drawn by the same slow pull he had once escaped, he saw his own face reflected in the blank windows. But it wasn't him. It was a version of him. One with no mouth, no eyes, just smooth. Pale skin stretched over something moving beneath. The door creaked wider. The house was inviting him in, offering him one last room, the room that hadn't existed before, the one they built just for him. He didn't want to move, but his feet did. He crossed the threshold. Inside, the walls whispered, not loudly, just enough they said his name, over and over, not like a threat, like a welcome. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. And then, a mirror, standing at the center of the room, not mounted, not framed, just floating, waiting. He looked, and saw nothing. No reflection, no face, just a blank space the size of a man, and slowly it began to fill in. First the eyes, then the mouth, then the smile, not his, never his, but shaped for him. A mirror of the part he'd left behind. The part that built this house from memory and guilt and love and death. The part that would never leave. The mirror rippled. And then he understood. This house wasn't for keeping people in anymore. It was for letting him out, letting something else out. He turned to run, but the door was gone. The girl was gone. And the crayon in her hand now pulsed gently in his own. He looked down. He was drawing. Again. The line on the wall wasn't finished, but Daniel's hand kept moving. The red crayon pulsed with a warmth that didn't belong to wax or friction, but something far older, something alive. His arm ached, muscles trembling with effort he didn't remember starting. Every motion felt guided, like he was copying a shape buried in his spine, a blueprint he had been born with but only now remembered. He tried to stop. His hand refused. The wall before him blossomed with symbols he couldn't name but understood, images that bled into each other. Eyes, stairwells, clocks with no hands, hands with no nails, a door that opened into a hallway that folded into a scream. And behind him, the mirror breathed. It made no sound, but he could feel it pulling air from the room, from his lungs, from him. Not to suffocate, to know, to study, to reshape. It wasn't just reflecting anymore. It was building, and it was using him as its mold. He jerked back from the wall, finally breaking the motion. The crayon snapping in his fingers with a sharp crack that felt like a bone breaking. He let it fall. It hit the wooden floor with a soft, wet plop. It wasn't a crayon anymore. It was flesh, pulsing, still red, still twitching. The room went quiet, too quiet. Even the breath in his chest seemed muffled, like his own body was being pushed just slightly outside the world. Then came the shift. Not a movement, not exactly, but a tilt in everything. The floor still beneath him, yet his balance slid. The mirror rippled. A figure stepped through, not emerged, formed, ground, piece by piece, from the surface, and as it coalesced, Daniel saw himself. But wrong, the copy wore no skin. It was made of sketch lines red and black, ever moving, like a child's drawing in motion. Its head turned without bones, its mouth opened too wide, and when it smiled, it didn't show teeth. Just more drawings, endless loops of the house within the darkness of its throat. And then it spoke. You never stopped. Its voice wasn't sound. It was graphite dragged across teeth. It echoed behind his ears, not in them. You think you escaped. It continued, stepping forward with a jagged jerk, arms flailing slightly behind it like puppet strings cut mid-dance. But you only stopped drawing in front of yourself, not beneath. Daniel backed away. The door was still gone. The walls were now covered with his work. Unconscious, involuntary renderings of the house, the attic, the chair, the children, the blood. You left the house, the thing said, but you brought us with you. Us, not me. Daniel's knees buckled as more movement stirred behind the mirror, figures leaking from its edge like oil. More copies, each slightly different, one with too many arms, one without a face, one dragging a trail of paper that screamed when it touched the floor. Each one wore his shape. He had drawn himself into the walls so many times that now the house had templates, and it had started printing. The first sketch, thing tilted its head. You still belong here. I don't, Daniel whispered. Yes, it said, because you never finished your story. You only paused it, so we came to help. It held out its hand. Another crayon formed in its fingers. Black this time. It pressed it into Daniel's palm. The warmth was unbearable. It burned like betrayal. Finish the room, the thing said. No. Then watch it finish itself. The walls groaned. The lines he had drawn began to shift, move, animate. The door behind him redrew itself into existence. But this time, it didn't lead out. It led down. A staircase spiraled below the room. Infinite and impossible, glowing faintly with the pulse of drawn blood. The house wasn't trying to trap him. It was evolving. Each refusal fed it. Each denial became a new hallway. Each memory he resisted gave it more detail. It no longer needed a victim. It needed an audience. The copies stepped forward in unison, standing around him in a perfect circle. Their voices joined in a whisper. A chant, not in words, but shapes. Each syllable took the form of a window, a crack, a keyhole. He looked down at the crayon. His hand moved. One final line. A doorway appeared on the wall before him. Behind it, white light. Clean. Empty. A possible end, or the greatest trap yet. He turned to the sketch him. What's behind that? The thing smiled. You drew it. You tell us. Daniel hesitated, then stepped forward. Touched the door. It creaked. Opened. The light didn't blind. It calmed. It was familiar. He stepped through, and on the other side was a blank room. White walls. White floor. No furniture. No noise. Just him. And on the far wall a mirror, a real one, and in it his reflection. Still, breathing, normal, no shadows, no flickers, just him. He stepped toward it, unsure, dizzy. He reached out, touched it. It was cold, real, solid. Then, tap, tap, from behind him. He turned. There was nothing there, except a single red crayon, lying on the floor, waiting. Daniel didn't pick up the crayon. He couldn't. His body wanted to, craved the shape of it in his palm like a forgotten limb reaching for reattachment. But his hand hovered, fingers twitching, trembling with the weight of knowing. That crayon had no wax. It was heat and memory and command. Drawing with it didn't just make things. It invited them, and he wasn't sure he had any more room inside him for invitations. The white room stayed white, walls without seams, floor with no grain, ceiling without light, yet somehow glowing faintly, as if illuminated from inside the air itself. No shadows, not even his own. The mirror on the far wall was still there, perfect, unblemished, reflecting only what stood before it. No tricks, no time lag. Just a man who looked older than his face admitted. He stared at himself, searching for the glitch, the slip, the small betrayal of reality that always exposed the house for what it was. But there was none. No flicker, no extra breath, no smile forming too soon. And then the reflection spoke, not with lips, not even with sound. It used thought. You're tired of it? I know. Daniel flinched, but didn't step back. You think you're at the end, but you're just where I was when you first began drawing me. The voice wasn't exactly his. It was cleaner, as if scrubbed of hesitation. You're not me, Daniel whispered aloud, because speaking was still something real people did. I'm who you gave away, the reflection answered, still unmoving. When you decided the story was bigger than your body. When you let the house live in your bones instead of just your head. Daniel blinked. The reflection didn't. You remember the knock, don't you? It asked. He did. Too well. He had been 5 years old, home alone for the first time. A single knock at the attic door. The attic they didn't use. The one bolted shut from the outside. Even though the house had no history of anything strange. Until that day. His mother returned hours later to find him hiding in the bathroom, trembling. Eyes blank. He had forgotten that knock for 20 years. The reflection took a step forward now inside the mirror. Daniel didn't move. The glass didn't ripple. It welcomed. I never stopped drawing, the reflection said. You just stopped seeing it. Daniel's fingers curled. Not into fists. Into shape. The shape of holding something slender, waxy, and warm. The red crayon was in his hand now. He didn't remember picking it up. He stared down at it. Its tip throbbed softly like a wound trying to clot. What do you want from me? He asked, voice low, hoarse. The mirror Daniel grinned. To choose. Between what? Between becoming the room. The reflection tilted its head. Or leaving someone else to build it. The crayon twitched. Daniel looked down. A small line had already been drawn on the wall to his right. A doorway. Half formed. He hadn't drawn it. Had he? He stepped back. The line grew on its own, curling downward in a red arc, forming the top of an arch. The house wasn't asking for permission anymore. It was expressing gratitude. Because once you build a house like this, once you believe in it, it doesn't die with fire or memory loss. It waits. In sketches. In reflections. In the small fear you carry after waking from a dream you can't describe. Daniel turned away from the mirror. The wall behind him had changed. A child's drawing now covered it completely. Crude, messy, but clear. A stick figure of him. Inside a square house, surrounded by black trees. And just outside the house, a smaller figure, watching, waiting, holding a crayon. He turned again. The mirror was gone. In its place was a window. But instead of glass, it showed a version of his apartment. Empty. But wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. Like no one had lived there in years. And on the coffee table, a drawing. Of this room. Of him in this moment. Staring into this window. He pressed his hand against the surface. It felt like cool water. Thin. Crossable. And he knew. If he walked through, he wouldn't be Daniel anymore. He'd be a sketch of Daniel. He'd be the drawing someone else found when they picked up a crayon without understanding what it meant. The price of leaving this place wasn't death. It was repetition. The house didn't want to trap him. It wanted to clone him. To spread itself through his outline. And he understood now every story about a haunted place. Every legend of a mirror that shows too much. Every tale of a child's drawing that came true. They all started the same way. With someone like him. Someone who thought the story had ended. When really it had just learned how to draw itself. Daniel turned back toward the blank wall, raised the crayon, paused. Then, slowly, carefully, he drew a circle. Not a door, not a window. Just a circle, and inside it an eye. Watching, bleeding, waiting. He stepped back, dropped the crayon. It didn't bounce. It melted. The walls flickered. The light dimmed. And somewhere very far away, in a world with no house, no attic, no mirror, a child woke from sleep, sat up, and began to draw. The child's crayon scraped softly across the paper, red curling into shape with a slowness that suggested reverence. Not speed. Not carelessness. Every line mattered. The house was returning again, not as memory, but as suggestion. And suggestion was all it ever needed. The child did not know why she was drawing it. She didn't question the urge. It came to her like hunger, like the pull of gravity, like the cold thrill that comes right before lightning strikes. Her room around her stayed silent, the walls dim in the morning light. Yet the space felt too deep, like it had grown longer without warning, like someone had unspooled her home just enough to let something else slip inside. The paper on her lap now bore the frame of a house, 2 windows, one door, but the windows were uneven, off, slanted like they'd been drawn from the memory of a scream. And the door, tall, narrow, was marked with an eye at its center, a circle, crudely inked, with something like a teardrop trailing beneath. The girl didn't recognize it, but her fingers moved without pause. Somewhere in the folds of the world, Daniel's circle had landed, and now it had begun. Elsewhere, Daniel stood in the room that wasn't a room anymore. The walls shifted subtly with each breath he took, like lungs adjusting to his rhythm. The crayon had melted into the floor entirely. Where it vanished, the floor pulsed red, beating once, twice, before stilling. His drawing remained, just a circle and an eye, but the feeling in the air had changed, less pressure, less hunger. As if, for the first time, the house was watching him back, not to manipulate, not to command, but to wait. He looked around. The window to his apartment had faded. The mirror had not returned, just blank space, white as death. Daniel stepped toward the circle he had drawn, stared at the eye. It stared back, not literally, there were no lids, no iris, but it felt like watching, deep, patient, mournful. And then he understood. The house wasn't evil, it was lonely. All its malice, all its twisting of space and memory and form, it wasn't revenge. It was desperation. For meaning, for someone to stay, someone to hold it in their head long enough for it to survive. He had been that someone, so had the girl. And now, maybe the next child drawing even now, legs crossed in a distant room, would carry its echo forward. A line, a shape, a single drawn window. Daniel touched the wall. His fingers passed through, no ripple. No pain, just absence. Beyond the wall, something moved. Not hostile, not welcoming, just present, waiting. He stepped through. The room dissolved behind him, and Daniel found himself in a hallway, but not like the others. This one was old, truly old, not stylized, not imagined, wood warped by time, wallpaper peeled in long curls. Floorboards creaked not because they wanted to say something, but because they were tired. Photographs lined the walls. Each one blurred, but he could tell. Each was of him. Not just him. Versions of him. In one, a child sitting cross-legged, crayon in hand, drawing the same house again and again. In another, a teenager in a hospital bed, eyes wide, staring at a blank page as nurses whispered at the door. In another, a man at a desk, face hollow, surrounded by hundreds of drawings tacked to the wall. And one photo, near the end, was burned. Only the outline of a mirror remained. Daniel moved past them, one step after another, the weight of time dragging behind him like a long, heavy coat. At the hallway's end, a door, not drawn, not imagined, built, wood, iron hinges, dust. He reached for the knob, but it turned on its own. The door opened slowly, and inside, a small room, no furniture, no walls, just space. And at the center, a desk, sitting at it Daniel, but not him. Older, eyes darker, hands stained red, not with blood but with wax. He was drawing and crying. The tears rolled silently, vanishing into the paper. He didn't look up. Daniel stepped forward. The other Daniel kept drawing. Each line summoned the room into shape. Behind him, walls grew. A window, a mirror, a cradle in the corner, and in it, nothing. Yet not empty, waiting. The older Daniel finally looked up, spoke without sound. "You didn't leave." Daniel shook his head. "Neither did you." The man gave a tired smile. "Then we make it better this time." He pushed the drawing toward him. It wasn't a house. It was a map. A way out. But the path led straight through the attic, and at its center, again, the eye, red, open. Daniel took the paper, felt it heat in his hand, and as the lines began to shift, as the map slowly twisted into a new version of the house, something behind him whispered, "She's still drawing." And Daniel realized with perfect clarity the house was no longer just made by him. It had become contagious. And this was not the end. This was the infection taking root. The house didn't need builders anymore. It needed viewers. And Daniel, he was the first story that knew. There was no longer a question of whether the house was real. It had become real. not in brick or plaster, but in repetition, in echo, in the thousands of quiet minds that had glimpsed it without knowing, in the drawings tucked under pillows, in the pages torn from journals, half sketches left abandoned on desks, forgotten not because they lacked meaning, but because they held too much. Daniel stood now in the hollow chamber at the center of the house's memory, holding a map that wasn't drawn but grown, fed by decades of fear and fascination, nourished by every whisper that insisted it was just a dream. Dreams were powerful. Dreams, he understood now, were just unshared blueprints. The map shifted in his hands, the paper pulsing like a heartbeat. The lines wiggled slightly, not erratically, but as if they were alive, waiting for instruction. Daniel's mind swam with possibilities, routes, exits, traps. The attic was still there in the center, unavoidable. It always had been. Even when it was erased from memory, even when it wasn't drawn, it waited. And now, the path back to himself ran straight through it. The older version of him across the table, wax-stained hands still resting on the desk, watched in silence. He had become something else, half memory, half witness. A version too tired to carry the infection forward, but too bound to let it go. He didn't speak, not anymore. Daniel could tell this one had screamed too much already, too long, until even his voice was just a sketch. But his eyes still held urgency, a need to warn. The girl, Daniel said quietly, voice brittle, she's still drawing. The older version gave the faintest nod, then reached slowly into the drawer beside him and pulled out a photograph, curled at the edges, fogged by time. On it the girl, no name, no smile, just her in front of the frame of a house that hadn't yet been filled in. Behind her, in the shadows, a sliver of red, barely visible, the curve of a crayon, the implication of a doorway. She's the next, Daniel whispered. The older him shook his head. No, he croaked, voice dry, cracking like brittle paper. She's first. The map in Daniel's hands twisted slightly, and the attic at the center began to bleed. A red stain, slow and circular, blooming outward until it reached the edge of the paper. It wasn't ink. It wasn't wax. It was remembering. The attic, it seemed, was active again. He dropped the map. It landed face up, the lines continuing to change, but he couldn't watch anymore, because he could hear something now. Above, floorboards groaning, breathing, the chair, rocking, and with it, the soft, unmistakable rhythm of scratching. Not random, deliberate, measured, like a hand in the dark dragging its nails down a door from the inside. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause, and in the pauses, breath, he looked up. There was no ceiling, just darkness above him now, endless and shifting. He stepped back from the table. The older version did not follow. He had rooted there, maybe by choice, maybe by consequence. The room around them flickered. Images formed on the walls, the house, in fire, in snow, underwater, floating, half submerged in the sky. Each version of it slightly wrong, slightly off kilter, but always present, always there, and in each, himself, alone, drawing, bleeding, watching. He turned and stepped through the nearest doorway. It led to a hallway. Tight, pulsing, lined with mirrors. Not reflective, just smooth glass. And behind each one, a child drawing. Some with crayons, some with chalk, some with nothing at all, just fingers dragging invisible lines into the air. And in each child's eyes, recognition. They knew the house. They didn't know how. But they knew. He moved forward, one foot after the other, barely breathing. The hallway didn't end, but it narrowed, until he was crawling, hands raw, knees blistered. And then, another room, small, dust-choked, smelling of old wood and forgotten breath. The attic. His attic, and in the center, the chair. It was no longer rocking, it was waiting. He stepped toward it, every muscle in his body rebelling, memories screaming at the edge of his mind. Not to run, but to sit. He sat. The moment he did, the attic closed around him, no walls. Just feeling, just weight, and in his lap, another crayon. Red, already warm. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. Because outside the attic, a child's voice was humming. A lullaby. Old. Off. Key. And somewhere in the real world, far beyond this layered nightmare of self and shadow, the girl drew her final line. A door. Tall. Thin. Trembling. Daniel smiled, tears sliding down his cheeks, not from sorrow, but from knowledge, because he finally understood what the infection really was. Not the house, not the mirror, not the attic, it was memory. And now no one could forget. The paper trembled beneath her fingers, not from her touch, but from the weight of the crayon. An impossible thing, warm like breath, slick like sap, and heavier than anything its size had a right to be. The girl didn't understand what she was finishing, only that she had to. The line needed to be closed. The doorway had been waiting too long. Her sketch had been slow, at first the outline of a crooked house, the door in the wrong place, a single dark window too small to look through and too large to ignore. And always that eye, the circle in the center of the door. It came from nowhere, from dreams, from silence, from the air. She never remembered drawing it, only seeing it once it was already there. Now, all that remained was the final curve, the final arc that would close the door and open everything else. In the attic that wasn't just memory, but now design, Daniel sat perfectly still in the chair that belonged to no one and everyone. He could feel her, not just as an echo. As creator, she was shaping it again, shaping him. The red crayon pulsed like a forgotten heartbeat across time. The attic shifted. Every beam groaned with anticipation. And the mirror, cracked, wounded, but unbroken, reflected not just Daniel's body, but something layered behind him moments. Lives. All the other selves that had come before and would come again. Somewhere, a door creaked open. Not in the house. Not in the world. In thought. And the girl, unaware of the pressure building through her veins, unaware that she was more than just a girl with a crayon, leaned forward and drew the final stroke. It wasn't loud. It didn't break the sky. It simply completed. And that was enough, because with that line, the house was no longer remembering. It was awake, all across its infinite versions, burned, drowned, buried, forgotten. It rose. In drawings taped to refrigerators, in etchings inside notebooks tossed in the back of school lockers, in whispered dreams where children walked hallways they didn't understand, it pulsed. Not violently, not maliciously, but certainly. Daniel felt it. The pressure inside his chest shifted, not crushing but widening, like his ribs were stretching to hold something larger than breath. He stood. The chair sighed beneath him, satisfied, relieved. Its part was done. The mirror didn't beckon now. It watched, waiting for what would come next. He stepped toward it, half expecting his reflection to fail him again. But this time, it was just him. A man aged by 1,000 lives he hadn't lived but still carried. His eyes, his real eyes, blinked slowly. And then he smiled, because he saw her, the girl, through the mirror, not reflected, linked, across time, across space. A connection born not of lineage but of understanding. She looked up from her drawing, paused, frowned, like she sensed it too, and then she said aloud, not to anyone in the room, but to something everywhere I didn't mean to let it in. Daniel nodded, as if she could see him. You didn't, he whispered. It was already inside. The attic door swung open behind him. It led not into darkness, but into the real world. Not his, hers. A bedroom, a drawing desk, a bed with crumpled sheets, and the girl standing alone, staring at the paper in front of her, their eyes locked. Across dimensions, across whatever fiction had separated dream from waking. You built it better than I ever could, he said. She blinked. Is it done? No, Daniel said, and then, more softly, it never is. She looked back at the drawing. It had changed. The house was smaller now, simpler, the window gone, the door closed. No eye, just a quiet square, a home. Daniel stepped through the attic, crossed the threshold into her world. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just watched. Who are you? She asked. He knelt, his knees groaning like old floorboards. I'm the last story, he said, until you write the next one. I don't want to draw it anymore. He nodded. Then you won't. But it'll still be there. Yes, he said. But maybe not as loud. Silence pressed into the room like a soft blanket. The paper on the desk fluttered once, then stilled. The crayon in her hand stopped pulsing, became ordinary. Just color again. Daniel stood. He walked to the window. Outside, the world moved as it should. No folding streets, no shifting shadows. Just life. I have to go, he said. Where? Back. To the house. He shook his head. No, he said. To before. She tilted her head. But you just got here. I've always been here, he said gently. In pieces. In sketches. She nodded slowly, not understanding, but not resisting either. As he turned to leave, she asked one more question. Will I forget? Daniel paused in the doorway. Only if you want to. She looked at the drawing one more time, then picked up the crayon, and drew a small heart on the door. No eyes, no windows, just that, a beat, a choice. Daniel smiled. And walked through the wall. Daniel didn't feel the wall as he passed through it. There was no sensation, no shift, no temperature drop, just an absence, a removal, like walking out of a dream that had soaked too deep into the skin to fully shake. The girl's room vanished behind him, not with drama, but with peace. A whisper of paper on wood, the creak of a floorboard letting go. He expected, maybe a return to the attic or the white room, or the reflection that had worn his face. But what came instead was silence. Pure, unassuming silence. And darkness. Not threatening, not hungry, just complete. A place between heartbeats. A hallway between pages. The spine of the story itself. He stood still in it, letting the quiet settle inside him. Letting the weight of what had happened, and what hadn't, fold neatly into the corners of his thoughts. The house was asleep now. Not dead. Not destroyed. Sleeping. Because that was always its final trick, to wait. To fade just enough for people to stop believing in it, stop fearing it. And then, gently, it would return, through lines and whispers and shapes that seemed innocent. A child's drawing, a forgotten dream, a knock at the attic door you swear you didn't hear. Daniel took a breath. It filled him differently now. He wasn't whole. He'd never be. But he was free. And that was more than he ever expected to be again. The infection had passed. Not cured, not removed, but shared. The girl, whether she knew it or not, had chosen something the others hadn't. She hadn't tried to trap the house, or burn it, or reason with it. She had redrawn it, changed the door, removed the eye, given it, for the first time, the shape of something safe. And maybe that was enough. Maybe the house didn't need to be erased. Just rewritten. As he moved forward, steps echoing softly in the not space, walls began to sketch themselves around him, not in wood or plaster, but in memory. Faces, places, laughter. The sound of his mother's voice before it grew tired. The boy he used to be, full of questions and mischief. The first time he held a pencil like it could mean something. All of it surrounded him, not trapping, but cradling. These were his rooms now, and they weren't haunted, they were his. The hallway ended in a single door, unmarked, no symbols, no scratches, just old wood. Warm in the faint glow of remembering, he placed his hand on it and felt nothing unnatural. Just the thrum of a story waiting to close. When he stepped through, there was no gasp, no fanfare, no sudden pull of reality shifting around him. Just his apartment. Quiet. Dusty. Exactly as he'd left it. Though the clock on the wall told him time hadn't waited. Months had passed. Maybe more. He blinked in the half-light, blinking until his eyes adjusted. The drawings were gone. Every sketch that once lined the walls, every fragment of the house he'd taped up in panic or desperation. Vanished, all except one. The drawing the girl had made. Folded and left on his kitchen table. He moved toward it slowly, unsure how it had followed him, or if he had brought it back. The paper was clean. Crisp, no smudges, no scorch marks. The lines were simple. A house, not twisted, not wrong, just still. And on the door, a red heart. No eye, no opening. just closed and safe. He sat at the table, hands in his lap, stared at it for a long time, and then, without thinking, reached into the drawer, pulled out a crayon, not red, blue, and with careful, hesitant fingers, he added something small to the corner of the paper. A sun, half risen, peeking over the top of the hill behind the house. He smiled. The house hadn't ended, but it had changed, and stories, like drawings, didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to be seen. In another home, in another town, the girl tucked her drawing into a folder. She didn't know why. She didn't need to. It felt right. She didn't dream about the house anymore. The eye was gone. The hallway stopped stretching. The attic stayed shut, and when she heard knocks now, she answered the door without fear. Sometimes, only sometimes, she thought she saw Daniel in her dreams, not lost, not broken, just walking, watching the horizon, a part of her story, and hers part of his. The house somewhere far and near rested, not evil, not finished, just waiting. But this time, not for a victim, for a visitor, for someone to redraw it. And this time, perhaps, the door would open to a room filled with light, and no mirrors, only windows,